And hey, welcome back to another episode of the Painfully Honest Tech Podcast. My name is Jason T. Lewis. Painfully Honest Tech. Yes, that's what we do here. We talk about the tech and the painfulness and the stuff that is, all things, well, all things, but usually mostly tech.
We had a pre-show. This is a full
Yeah,
conversation that's
yeah,
leading into this. That's why we're laughing and you're
we've
not
been
in on the
talking for
joke.
a half an hour and we just hadn't hit record yet. So
For sure.
tis the way it goes over here. But anyway, we're back again. Thanks so much for stopping by, folks. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, thank you for watching it on the YouTubes. If you're catching a clip, this is not the best clip to be catching because it's just us introducing ourselves, but there are probably other clips that you could watch. And if you're listening to this on audio, that means I figured out how to get my RSS feed working.
Oh yeah.
and then, you're listening to it on audio. But regardless, wherever you are watching this, listening to it, whatever, it would be awesome. Hit subscribe, like or rate or whatever it is that you could do there, because my world domination plan is fully underway.
Yeah,
And
it's full steam ahead.
yes. So, but I need you people out there to help me dominate the world with painful honestness.
The world could use it. That was another part of our conversation leading into this.
Yes.
It'd be nice to have sort of a fresh, frank relationship with some of our audience again.
I'm trying. That's one thing I realized recently was the reason people. So I went through this whole wilderness of what kind of thing should I be doing, right?
Yeah.
And so because I had some popular success on YouTube with one kind of thing, but then I got to where I was before that with another kind of thing, and so it's just been kind of a sort of wandering through the wilderness of online video, trying to figure it out, right?
We're all in this kind of existential crisis too. I feel like that is a common feel a lot of us are going through, for sure.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with my guest host this week, this is Mr. Juan Bagnell, some gadget guy. You may have seen him on Pocket Now. You may have seen him with Newegg TV. You may have seen him all over the place. He's been doing this YouTube thing for ever, it seems. One of the first tech YouTubers that I remember watching. So Juan's been around for quite a while, and doing really cool stuff, covering, well, these days, it's always been phones. One of the best camera coverage YouTube channels, if you want to talk phone cameras. But recently we've been doing some AR video stuff and talking about that. So, Juan's been out there for a long time.
Spreading out a bit. Yeah, trying to tap a few other. See, right now I think the theme for my channel is get Juan up to speed on things that he doesn't do well. So I've also been doing solar, e-bikes, mobility.
Right.
I'm as we're talking about this, in about 3 hours, I'm going to publish my very first video on a 3D printer.
Ooh.
So it's really just trying to putting the gadget back in some gadget guy is the strategy now.
It's really interesting because, when I first started doing this, I was mostly audio, gaming headsets, headphones.
Same. Yeah.
And that was what that's what my entry point, my gateway drug to tech in general has always been audio.
That's why we're buddies, man. Old school audio nerds, for sure.
And, then smartphones were kind of like the tech product of the 2010s, right?
Yep.
And just got more and more popular, and more people were coming to find out about the smartphones and learn about what to do with them, or which one is better than that one, or to fight amongst one another about
I'm a Ford man. I'm a Chevy guy. Yeah, it works for phones too.
Just like Mac versus PC back in the day.
For sure.
2000, well, the 2000s or late 90s. But phone content has really slowed down.
Oh, big time.
I think that, the writing was on the wall when $1,000 phones became a thing. And, people were obviously gonna if they were gonna spend that on a phone, they were gonna use it for a longer period of time. And I think, for most people, 2 to 3 years upgrade cycle is probably pretty normal these days. Especially
the average is closing in on 3 years. As we techies talk about updates and improvements year over year over year, I think we do a very poor job of staying with the actual market, where people are trying to push their phone purchases out to around 3 years and longer.
Yeah.
So that's the average. For every person who's flipping their phone every year, there are more people trying to last 4 years
Yeah.
with their phone purchase.
Well, the answer. So I bought the iPhone 14 to review,
Sure.
but the iPhone 4, I got the Pro Max, which is my preferred
Mm-hmm.
model of iPhone,
Yep.
and they went to eSIM, which
Yep.
which doesn't really work all that well for me because I switch phones so often
Yeah.
during the year. Not as much as I did maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but I still switch
Still.
pretty often.
Yeah.
And so my wife at the time had an iPhone 12 Pro Max, this one right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had this phone for a year or two, and so I just decided to trade her the 14 Pro Max because
Right.
and
Yep.
take the 12 Pro Max and keep that because I could switch in and out of whatever phone I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest, like the 14 Pro Max, it has some cool features. It has the always on display where
Mm-hmm.
you can see the pictures and all that kind of stuff, and it has the dynamic island, which I mean is not a
It's
notch, I guess.
it's a notch, but it's not. I mean,
And
it's
sometimes it has,
banner notifications like we've had
yeah.
on every other phone
Remember when
in a prettier
the LG
the
V10?
ticker display.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
I've
was
got
the
it right
first
over
one.
there.
Hmm.
I'll boot it up. The V10, even though it has that terrible Qualcomm boot looping chip, my V10 is still going strong. So I pull it out of retirement every now and then just to bask on all the things we used to have.
I love those stainless steel rails on
The
that thing.
rails, man. We sound so old right now.
I know. That
The
was like,
V60 was like years ago, and here we are, like waxing philosophical in remembrance of a phone that was 6 years before that.
I know. I had the V6. Well, I had the only V series phone I still have is the V50, and
Yeah,
the V
because you're an
V50's,
audio dude. The V50
yeah,
is the audio phone,
yeah,
hands down. Yep.
and so the V50 came out in 2017,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. So that
Well,
phone is
2018? No, wait. So, okay, V60 was 2020. So
okay, yeah,
V50 was 2019. Okay.
okay, yeah, and so we're talking the V50 and the V60 were audio centric phones with analog headphone jacks, DACs, and amps, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2020 was fully 4 years after Apple took away the headphone jack.
Yeah,
And so, to that's one thing that I miss about LG, and
for sure.
taking it back to how smartphones have sort of changed as like a topic on YouTube. It's
Mm-hmm.
uh it's gone from LG made some cool phones and you could cover those. I mean, LG was at least like 250 to 500,000 views a year for me, you
Easy.
know,
Yeah.
from like, and so that's all gone.
Yep.
And, they, they put out like some of the weirdest phones they ever made. And then we're just like, peace out.
We can say that they at least went out on a high note because the last year of LG was probably the most exciting feature complete year, but we only figured that out in hindsight. So you
Right.
had the V60 with dual display, you had the Velvet. Think about a mid-ranger phone. And think about
Yeah.
all those people that were complaining about the Velvet and the case being too thick, even though it was thinner than like a Galaxy Z Fold.
Right.
But the Velvet, think about what other mid-ranger had a headphone jack, memory card expansion, had the capability to do dual display,
Yep.
had a desktop mode so you could
Yep.
use your phone as a computer, had stylus support so you could
I know.
scribble on the screen. We've never had a Note Medium, a Galaxy Note A series.
Right.
And here this was. The Velvet was the mid-ranger productivity feature complete device. And well, it's just not good enough. You should just get a Galaxy A series or something. And we've
Yeah.
lost it. Now we will never get anything like that ever again.
And the thing about it is, so LG is an interesting study going back to what was it, the LG G7 or G8? So they were making some headway and making some. The G series was a good phone, some different
Mm-hmm.
features than what everybody else was doing,
Sure.
and then I forget which model it was, but they released a model, and I remember Erica Griffin doing this video where she's like scraping the paint off of it.
So the death days for LG is right around that era. So the G4 suffered from that Qualcomm
Mm-hmm.
SoC. So it
Mm-hmm.
was the Snapdragon 810 and the Snapdragon 808. So we had the Flex, the LG Flex,
Yep.
and we had the LG G4. And that chip from Qualcomm ran so hot, it caused like soldering to melt on the boards, and it would cause boot looping.
Right.
Every single phone manufacturer that used that chip that year, basically those phone brands died. HTC, the One M9, that
Mm-hmm.
was an 808. It was an 810, I think. Um, the Nexus line, even from Huawei, I mean, like
Yeah.
every single phone that got stuck with that got cratered. And that was the only year I can remember Samsung bringing Exynos to the United States.
Right.
And so
Right.
Samsung was able to weather that storm. Qualcomm never got the ire on that. It was, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
HTC phone runs too hot. Oh, this LG phone boot
Right.
loops. And then
Yeah.
that lived with LG forever. And then
Yeah.
so to immediately follow the G4 with the G5 that had that weird primer paint coat that
Yeah.
Erica Griffin was scraping off just made LG look like a cheap brand that put out shoddy products. But again, we lost a lot of stuff like user replaceable batteries
Yeah.
after those kinds of issues
Well,
were sort
those
of
might be
brought to
coming
light.
back. Those
Well,
might.
no, it's the right, it's the correct play.
Yeah.
The EU is now having to look at, we're creating mountains of e-waste. The industry is not getting it done. And I'm really tired of companies getting to say, hey, we're so profitable by selling all this stuff, but we're not responsible for the end of life.
Yeah.
That's on governments, that's on cities and municipalities, that's on waste management, but that's not on us. So if you can't impact
Yeah.
repairability and replacement parts and you can't make your products better for consumers, then unfortunately regulators need to get in and regulate what happens in the end of life
Yeah.
of a gadget. So I'm all for it. I know it's going to cause some difficulties in design. We're going to have to do weird things to maintain stuff like water resistance, but
Yeah.
it's so much more vital to be able to replace a battery. I've
Yeah.
got a Huawei Nova on my bookshelf over there, which I think came out in like 2015.
Mm-hmm.
It has a Snapdragon 620. It was
Right.
like one of their first mid-ranger phones after the Nexus. It actually has the Nexus design we would have gotten if Huawei had done another
Right.
Nexus.
Right. Yeah.
That chip is still a good performer today.
Yeah.
4K video, great performance, snappy UI. The only thing, if you had really used that phone, the battery would be dead.
Right.
So if you could replace the battery, you'd have a brand new phone all over again, and it's a perfectly competitive phone for using as a communicator today.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to get people retrained on is you're used to your phone slowing down and then you just buy a new phone, and that is so wasteful.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, back in the so in the early days of smartphones, I think people bought new phones, back in like 2010-ish, all the way
You know,
up
when
through like,
dinosaurs still
yeah,
roamed the earth,
exactly.
because we're old.
You know, especially, I mean, this is no knock against Android, but I think Android had some unique challenges because they were a platform that had many third-party companies utilizing their software. So it was really
Yeah,
hard for them to optimize that software, and it took,
for sure.
I think, longer for Android to kind of get to the place where it wasn't like every time a new phone came out, the
Hmm.
phone just worked better. You know,
Right.
that was the case all the I want to say all the way up to like 2017, 2018 was, I think, when we reached this point of smartphone where the platforms had matured, the operating systems had matured, the designs had gotten to the point where they weren't breaking, they weren't, nearly as often
Yeah.
as they had been in the past. All the R&D had been done, and so I think 2018 or so is about where we hit peak smartphone. But in those earlier years, people were buying new phones in part because the phone they had just wasn't working very well. And
Yeah.
and Android phones didn't have as much software support in terms of new operating system updates and stuff like that.
I push back on some of that idea because if you go back to an old Android phone and you didn't daily driver it,
Hmm.
it's the components that failed. It's components like the battery. After
Right.
about
Right.
2 years, that's really where I feel a lot of consumer. I mean, again, there's a difference between the audiences that our channels have, where they can
Right.
dig into the tech nitty gritty and they understand the software a bit more and all the app updates. But when you listen to your family and friends complain about
Yeah.
using an older phone, often it's something like a battery. And to not like sort of whitewash history, one of the major forces that reinforced that 2 year cycle was Apple.
Yeah.
So, for as much as Apple was so good about making these phones, Apple also put in undersized batteries and then throttled your phones to
Hmm.
make your performance worse right around that 2 year point where you'd be getting off a contract and looking at flipping your phone.
Yep.
So, as much as Android gets this reputation for like, oh, but you didn't get all the software updates. Well, back in the day, you didn't want iPhone updates. Apple
Yes.
would kill your phone
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
and force you to buy a new one.
and for
But that
anybody,
brings us. But I just want to say, I mean, like, it brings us back to today, and I don't want to, because you and me, we can go
yes.
long-winded on the history of smartphones. You're using an iPhone 12 again, and
Yeah.
tell me, like, for as a daily pocket computer communicator, how much different is that from having used your iPhone 14?
From a day-to-day basis, like, it's not slower. It's not, some people are like, oh, I could never look at 60 hertz display. And I'm like, honestly, like, maybe it's my eyesight is bad. Maybe, I don't know, but 60 hertz, 120 hertz on a 6 to 7 inch display, I'm like, okay, whatever,
I mean, I can see the difference, but if you're
It's
telling
not,
me it's a difference between battery life and having a
yeah.
slightly more fluid app drawer,
Yeah, some
I
people have,
don't know anyone in my circle of family and friends who would give a poop about that fluidity of the UI experience over telling them, "Hey, this is going to extend your runtime like 10%."
yeah. Yeah,
They don't want this like excessive horsepower just to open, Instagram. If you
yeah.
go and tell them like, "Hey, this is something that could like double your battery life out in the field." Oh, well, that's a lot more interesting. And we're not listening to consumers. Techies, especially for all the tech channels that make reviews on these average consumers and then do
Hmm.
things like, you remember when the Pixel 6a came out and we had channels that were like, 60 hertz. Let me show you what 120 hertz looks like on my iPhone Pro
Yeah.
against this $400 Android.
I know.
Boy, doesn't that look terrible. And I shoot my videos in 24 frames per second to show you how cinematic my B-roll can be. So I have to go into extreme slow motion to show you the
Yeah.
screen refresh of the eye. And see, like, you can't tell me that's an average consumer assessment that's going to help your family and friends.
No,
That
I
is
mean,
misrepresenting the products and services and painting them in an incorrect light. That's very dishonest when
at
we do that kind of positioning of products.
at best, it's maybe interesting and educational for the consumer who's watching that video.
But it
But
conflates because at the end of
yeah,
that video, they make the iPhone recommendation. Well, if you price an iPhone against a Pixel 6a, what are you going to buy?
yeah, and that's the thing. Like,
You're
I
going to
think
buy
the
an iPhone SE, Jason. That was the answer to the question.
well, I yeah,
So the iPhone SE is not delivering all that, but we've turned this into the same problem we had when it was Mac versus PC.
right,
You had that uncle who was like, "Oh man, my new MacBook is so much better than my old Dell." Well, what was your old Dell? Like a 6-year-old laptop that I bought for $400. Well,
right,
what's your new MacBook? A $2,500 stainless steel machine that's brand new. So
yeah,
it wasn't Dell versus Apple, it was cheap and old versus brand new and expensive.
yeah.
And so when you show the iPhone Pro against the Pixel 6a, and then you make the recommendation for Apple over Pixel, and people go and shop $400 iPhone, they're not getting that. So it is,
Yeah.
I feel this is targeted and calculated, and it's extremely disingenuous when we
See,
see those types of conversations play out.
what ends up happening for me is like I've pretty much stopped, other than when I get into when I start to exchange words with someone, either
That's
and
a very diplomatic way because, like, tell me you go into a conversation now and it's basically almost always a fight.
yeah,
I got a comment from someone just like, these are all the reasons I love my Samsung phone.
yeah,
Because I had put out this 90-minute podcast talking about all of my personal and professional reasons for why I'm not a fan of Samsung. And it was basically just the most hostile, like, debate me, bro. And you're like, you're just telling me you like your phone.
Yeah.
Like this doesn't need to be a confrontation. And you're
No,
not going to
well,
change my mind because I
that's
also had all these reasons for why I'm not a fan of the brand. So I'm sorry,
that.
but you were
Yeah.
saying when you exchange words
Well,
with
in,
individuals.
interesting things happen. Like I typically, if I'm reviewing an Android phone,
Sure.
unless it's very specifically like one feature versus the other feature, and the iPhone does this differently or whatever, I don't talk about iPhones in an Android phone review.
Because a review should not be a comparison.
Right.
Those are different words and they should be different videos. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, please go on.
And but so when I made a video about the Flip and Fold 5, right as they were announced, and I was just kind of like, this is the same phone. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
this it's got
it
a
is.
couple of different colors, and everything else is the same. There's they took a quarter of an inch gap away from the Fold, right?
And you're being generous with a quarter of an inch, but yeah, go
And
on.
the Flip, I think, saw the biggest upgrade in its outside screen.
I
It's
think it's totally fair because the Flip was also selling more units. And I
Yeah.
think from a business perspective, Samsung looked at putting a bit more of that polish, adding video out, adding the better cover display, and seeing more competition from Motorola. So if you're a
Right.
Samsung fan and you like features like foldable phones and things like Samsung Decks,
Yeah.
you owe Motorola a huge thank you because in North America, they're the company that's actually inspiring more competition from Samsung right now.
Yeah, and a lot of times, well, I mean, we could go back to talk about how until LG left the market, they were number 3 in North America, right?
Oh yeah, they were big. Yeah.
And I think they had like a 13 plus
At
percentage of
their
the
peak,
marketplace.
I don't remember the exact number, but it was double digits. It was
Yeah,
over 10%. Yeah.
and so yeah, Motorola is kind of sneaky in there in the
Hmm.
same way that LG was, in that a lot of their sales, I think, come from the $500 and lower phones.
Well, that's the vast majority of smartphone sales.
Right.
The
And
vast
so
majority of smartphone sales happen, I think, under $500.
yeah. And for me, what was interesting about when I made that video, and I just was kind of complaining about the fact that, we're getting all this hype about this phone. And I have nothing against, like, the Fold 4 was it was the best version of the Samsung Folds that I had used. Meanwhile, my daughter,
Yeah.
I bought the Flip 4 to review and gave it to my daughter, and within 6 months the screen died,
Yeah.
and they gave her a reconditioned one,
Yeah.
and within 3 months that screen died.
Yep.
And so I have it sitting in storage over here, just waiting for like some time when I can trade it in that condition for a
Sure.
good discount on something. But every time I make a video about an Android phone, and I'm critical of it,
Hmm.
there's this like,
Well, Jason, I just been meaning to have the conversation about why you're such a hater, like
yeah.
all the time, man.
Well, it's painfully honest. Okay, I'm not hating. Painful honesty. Um, I say the things that people won't say. That's what I say I'm doing here. Okay, that's my marketing pitch. But there's something that happens with Android, fans, like, the people who get sort of
Sure.
agita over anything that's criticizing the brand that they like, but they always come back with, well, well, Apple,
Hmm.
it doesn't
Well,
make their,
a
and
lot of childish people on the internet. I mean, this is where you've got to go in and actually like link them to things like your logical fallacy is or your debate fallacy is,
I
because
know.
you're immediately going to descend into things like moving the goalposts and whataboutisms. And unfortunately, because this has been my experience where I am a fan of Android as a platform, and I've been over the last several years of my life, I've been trying to untangle myself from being a fan of a brand. Because
Right.
when you start doing that, the brand will eventually let you down. And then
Mhm.
you have nowhere to go. I started out as an Apple fanboy, became a Samsung fanboy. I was the biggest LG stan on the internet. I think I can wear that badge
Yeah, I
appropriately
think you
given
and
my
I were
history of
both
channels.
both up there in
Major.
the LG You
For
know,
sure.
I still have
Um,
people complaining that I can't do LG content anymore.
yeah. No, I got another comment today. Like, hey, I'm looking at buying I buy old phones. I'm looking at buying a new old phone. What are your thoughts on the V60?
It's like,
It's still around.
go for it.
Um,
And it's probably
so
like $250.
for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, dude. And for anyone out here, if you're an audio nerd like we are, and the best thing you can do is buy an old LG phone to use as a portable media player.
Oh yeah.
An LG has this brilliant second life. You might need to get the battery replaced or something like that. So it might not be as cheap as just getting the phone,
Hmm.
but a G8, even a G7, a V50, a V60, these things are brilliant. And if you look up the prices on standalone media players, they will have slightly better audio quality at like 4 times the price
Right.
of buying an old LG. But I digress. One of the things that you're also going to get kind of caught up in is, especially just you're having this conversation, you're talking about your experiences in reviewing Samsung, and we're globally kind of calling this Android. But
Right.
Samsung has the most visceral, loudest, most disruptive pocket of a fan base. And
Mm.
this is something I've been trying to do a better job of delineating in my coverage, is because I kind of like picking at bullies.
Yeah.
And Samsung courts a bullying mentality. Like they
Yeah.
have over their years of marketing. They not only make fun of their competitors, they also make fun of their competitors' employees, and they also make fun of their competitors' customers. And this draws a certain kind of mindset to
Hmm.
the tiniest vocal minority of
Hmm.
Samsung fans. So there's a difference between someone who really loves a Samsung phone but can entertain criticisms of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and then there's someone who is just completely unhinged if you say anything that even reads as critical of the brand that they've stapled their lifestyle to.
Right.
And Samsung Knights are insufferable and unwinnable. Like they're lost causes. But
Yeah.
Samsung fans can often be reasonable people that we have fun debates with. And there's the gamesmanship. Like we were saying, like
Yeah.
sports teams or Ford versus Chevy or something like that.
Yeah.
Apple versus Samsung. That stuff can be really fun.
Yeah.
But you're immediately going to draw the toxic on top of that. And that's where I've gotten my most credible death threats.
Yeah.
So,
And that's the thing. Again, like pointing out that these are logical fallacies in people's attempts at argumentation is, it's like
right.
moving the goalposts or false dichotomies or
False
whatever.
equivalencies.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, if your argument is, well, Apple does it too, that means you're either 12 or you don't know how to argue. Right. I mean, you could certainly make the point that Apple doesn't innovate in terms of like their form factor or whatever every year. But the one thing that I pointed out to somebody was that Apple has continually improved their first party apps to the place where,
Yeah.
Apple Notes is pretty much as good as any notes app that you could pay
It's
a
really good.
monthly fee for, right?
Yeah.
And so they've continued to iterate on that, and there are then there's iMessage and there's all these other things that Apple
Mm-hmm.
has sort of brought into the fold to make their experience, I think, better for their consumer, right? But
Yes.
here's
I
here
think that. Oh, sorry. So please. Yeah, I'm not going to interrupt. Yeah.
here's the thing that I always try and point out to people is that Apple is a lifestyle company that sells hardware, right?
Yeah.
And Samsung, LG, all these other companies are hardware companies that sell lifestyle devices,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Samsung has done a good job at taking One UI, from the TouchWiz days where it was like
right. Yeah.
clearly somebody, who's not an aesthetic in any way, shape, or form designed TouchWiz, right? And
Right.
and now One UI is a much better
Yes.
operating system skin.
Then
But
yes.
Apple always started out with the user experience in mind. And it was the same thing with the Mac versus PC, right?
Sure.
So people complained about the Mac because you couldn't get down to the command line and sort of program things in. I mean, you can, but it's not it's not like right there in a window that you can just call up the terminal, you know, like
Right.
so so people who like to be able to tinker with their stuff and get down into the nitty-gritty of their operating system, or have more fluidity in how they can arrange their UI or anything like that.
Sure.
You know, Android appeals to them, but the iPhone, I think, I mean, you know, and I'm not even I can certainly criticize Apple for many things,
Right.
but the overarching thing that I appreciate about Apple is that their customer experience has always been sort of their guiding principle in terms of what their devices are supposed to do.
So I agree with the sort of broad sentiments on
Right.
something like this. And now we fight and debate and
Mm.
argue because what about Symbian, bro? No. So the thing that I think I've had the most trouble with Apple, and this is always kind of the issue that becomes a bit shocking, is everything that you're talking about, I think Apple earned in years previous. And now Apple is coasting on that reputation while engaging in new business practices and new business models that actually harm their customers the worst first. So you talk about like that customer service experience is so great, and you go into an Apple store and they do this, this, and that, and they can just swap you a new device, and that's brilliant. They've got boots on the ground and they've got brick and mortar retail to really appeal to all of those people. The flip side of that is also a business that is now responsible for some of the most egregious business practices in harming right to repair initiatives.
Right.
So all of that always comes with a counterpoint. There's always a balance point. Something good about Apple. This is great. You're talking about the streamline and the familiarity of the UI. I don't believe any software is intuitive. There is no such thing as intuitive software. There
Right.
are only varying degrees of familiarity. And so that works to Apple's advantage. I did a great interview back in my Pocket nowadays. The video quality is terrible because of the way that we did the call, but it was someone with the AARP. This
Uh-huh.
is back when iPhones, I think, were just starting to get rid of home buttons. And he
Oh
was
yeah.
very concerned for
Hmm.
exactly the same reasons that I was. Like, man, my grandmother's really good on her old iPhone with a home button. Trying to get my, at the time, 80-year-old grandmother to like swipe and move and gesture is not as good. It
Yeah.
is a demonstrably worse experience for her. And that's what a part of his crux was. Like at the AARP, we were recommending iPhones because they kept this consistency of
Right.
operation. Well, if you care about things like customizing, all of Apple's recent efforts for things like widgets and an app drawer are pale
Yeah.
comparisons. They're pale facsimiles of what you can do on an Android. So
Right.
if you cared about that feature and you really like that you can do that kind of stuff and you've been waiting for Apple to eventually get rid of just the endless sea of home pages with randomly organized apps,
Oh, you
Apple
can put
has
them.
the
You could put them
worst.
in folders.
That's what I do. I mean, if I pull out my iPhone SE, I basically turned it into an Android. So I have one folder that I call App Drawer at the bottom of my
Yeah.
phone just
Yeah.
so that I can fix Apple's terrible implementation of this. So what happens is someone gets used to it.
Yeah.
Think about advanced file management in iOS. Like if you have files you need to get off your phone to a computer to some kind of storage device or a NAS, you have to ratchet your way into a very specific Apple version of that. And so that the person who jumps through all those hoops and figures out how to do it, they're not going to be inclined to go switch to something else because it was so much work.
Yeah.
It was so much sweat equity to figure all that out. So again, it's like we always let the media regurgitate what the Apple marketing is, the it just works of their
Yeah.
marketing, and we never challenge the ideas that they're putting out when really Apple kind of deserves a lot more scrutiny, a lot more pushback, because some of the things that they're doing today are extremely anti-competitive and are very anti-consumer. But the people who are going to get hurt first are the people spending the most money with Apple.
Right.
And that's the
Yeah.
shame. That's always the sad part of this is like I'm complaining because what Apple does today will affect me in 2 years. But what Apple does today is hurting people today.
Right. And the thing that so when you talk about iOS, I was super happy when they introduced widgets. And so when I started using the widgets and they brought in the app library, I thought, "Oh, this is great." You know, now I can
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to have like 50
Homepages. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just like anything I don't want, I can just have in the app drawer or the app library. But
Mm-hmm.
then as I started to use it, the app library becomes a pain in the in the in the
It's real
ASS
bad.
because you
It's real
don't know.
bad. And
Apple
did
comes
you
up with
ever?
the
Did you?
topics, you
Did
know.
you ever? Did you? I'm sorry. I'm
No,
stepping
go
on you here,
ahead.
and I'm real bad about this. Did you ever play with a Windows Phone back
Oh
in the
yeah,
day?
yeah,
Tell me that Microsoft's implementation of a side-scrolling alphabetized list that's easily searchable and has that great like thumb scroll. I think even
hmm,
Blackberries used to do that too. Million times better
yeah,
than anything Apple has put out to help you organize your apps. And I really feel that this is a part of Apple's software strategy. We are doing this weird convoluted thing that when you memorize all the steps and it becomes familiar to you is another aspect of consumer lock-in. Because if we made something that was more broadly familiar, more accessible, or more customizable, it would be easier for you to go and switch to a competitor's product. I think
yeah.
they're actually making this stuff by design more convoluted or more difficult to use than it needs to be so that it becomes the Apple way and it becomes a brand name. Think
Yeah.
about the correction that you just made. You called it an app drawer because that's what it is, but Apple's brand name is Apple Library. It's an
And
ARM SoC, but it's Apple Silicon. It's a mixed reality headset, but it's spatial computing. I
yeah,
mean, like everything they're doing is basically marketing in a way that locks the consumer into their ecosystem and it misrepresents how their competitors' products work. And now I find that to be very objectionable. Just as like when a company misrepresents how their products work, we sue them. Those
right.
commercials go off the air. I think we need to get to a point where regulators look at a keynote and say, "Hey, you talked about your competitors' products in a way that's not accurate.
Yeah.
Something needs to happen there because this is the main consumer crux of education now are like advertisements.
Yeah.
Like they're not coming to us YouTubers, let me tell you, they're not watching our videos these
No.
days.
No.
But when Apple can put out marketing at billions of dollars a year and they're misrepresenting the performance of their competitors, that to me becomes a potential class action lawsuit.
And the thing is, I mean, Apple's always been a great
Marketing
marketing
brand.
company, right?
That's what they are. 1984, baby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember seeing that on the
Directed by
Super Bowl.
Ridley Scott.
I know. I remember watching the Super Bowl and seeing that ad run
Yep.
in real time.
A,
And
a,
so,
a friend of my dad's had like this really exotic technology that could record television
ooh,
broadcasts.
like a
And
VCR.
he had a copy of the 1984 ad, and I watched that thing over and over. And I was 5 years old, and I
Hmm.
watched it. I mean, just like stop, rewind, watch it again. Stop, rewind, watch it again. And then I'd go into like a hardware electronics store and I'd write like, 3 lines of basic code, like in Tandy Electronics and stuff
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And like, it was, that's what kicked me into being an Apple fanboy. Those
Right.
little Macs were in schools. All up until just out of college, I was working for a DOE contractor and I had my hands in the guts of Power Macs and Xserves back when Apple used to make
Hmm.
server grade hardware.
Hmm.
And that's what kind of spurred this love of like high end computing and like doing things in a different way. And that's what the company Apple used to be. But
Right.
I do not believe that that is the company Apple is today.
I think you have a point. I mean, the the one thing that does frustrate me is, and again, it's sort of like it becomes a sort of golden handcuffs situation
Oh, yeah,
where
totally.
once you I was talking last week about like how many Apple products do you have to buy before you're locked into the Apple ecosystem, right?
Two.
So I mean,
It's
I
it's
was
like the Tootsie Roll Pop. One, two, three.
it's an
Three.
Apple. You got the phone, you got the iPad, you got the watch. Uh,
Apple Watch. That's the one I
yes,
want to give Apple the most credit on. If you want golden handcuffs, Apple Watch is one of those incredibly difficult experiences to pry yourself away from.
and honestly, like I don't use my Apple Watch the way I thought I would when it was introduced, right? I
Sure.
thought I'd be like on there doing little things. I don't interact with it that way all that much.
Hmm.
But notifications and all those things, it's great. I mean, just to be able to look and see that instead of pick up your phone. I mean, that's
Gatekeeper. That's why I don't care about always on displays. And I love people who are like, oh, but you need this on your phone or the cover display on a foldable. And you're like, no.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, like, I get it, but that's what a smartwatch has been doing. I mean, it's also why I desperately miss watches like the Pebble and the Qualcomm Talk.
yeah.
Those were way ahead of their time, but they did that where no, I have a gatekeeper. I can leave my phone in my pocket, and this is also where we've been so deficient. Where I had glasses that were a heads-up display.
Right,
They weren't AR. They weren't anything super fancy, but it was your smartwatch up at eye level. And
right.
I've said this before. I think one of the last times we talked, I was prattling on about this too. But in all of those years, we have never gotten that experience again.
Yeah,
And so many more consumers would benefit from that than buying into the idea of the future of the potential of the maybe-ness of AR for like $4,000.
right.
Instead, they could, this whole time, we could have had better practical heads-up display, notification rich, ways to streamline our relationships with tech. But that wasn't cool enough, and we know AR is right around the corner, and Apple's going to do it right. So don't go buy what's out there today because in a couple years it's going to be obsolete. And now we've had nothing.
So
Like there's literally been nothing.
so I've used like both Oculus, like the Oculus Rift and the Rift S. I've had
Sure.
the PSVR. I don't have the PSVR
Oh,
2 yet.
oh man, PSVR 2 is so much. PSVR is very it's like makerspace
Yeah,
VR for PlayStation. It's
yeah.
not great.
And I mean, I think the only reason I haven't done PSVR yet is because it's locked into that system, and that
Hmm.
system is very locked down. So you're
For sure.
reliant on either third-party developers who develop for PlayStation or Sony themselves and the different to get any
Hmm.
kind of software. And my PSVR experience was that there just wasn't very much stuff, right?
Yeah.
So at $550 for the
Hmm.
for the PSVR, it's just I'm like for the two, I'm kind of like waiting.
Sure.
But
But you're going to blow 3,500 on a Vision Pro.
well,
So there you go.
because I don't want to get
You
I don't want to
burnt.
get deep into the Vision Pro yet.
Oh, we're doing it.
But
We're
it's
here. We've arrived. The bus
okay.
just dropped me off. This is the scheduled stop.
So the Vision Pro to me now, like I've done 2 videos on the X Real Airs.
Sure.
So I did one video just on the glasses themselves and how they connected to mobile devices, et cetera, et cetera. And then they
Hmm.
released their Neptune, their Mac app, and that was really interesting. And I think that, and I don't have the Beam yet, and I've been trying to get it,
It's pretty
because
sweet.
yeah, because that's sort of the next step that I want to be able to see is like, okay, so how far can this go? One of
Hmm.
my issues with the current crop of VR and AR glasses is that as a glasses wearer who cannot,
Hmm.
get away from wearing glasses,
Sure.
it's difficult. And my problem is that my eyes I have astigmatism. I've got dual vision lenses. I've got all this other stuff. It's really
Yeah.
hard to get like any kind of specialty lenses made for
Oh yeah.
my eyes, right?
So really quick, I want to interject here. Why one of the reasons why I've been so mad that we keep putting off the daily practical in favor of this sci-fi futuristic promise. Everything you're describing right there should have been solved along the way
Yeah.
with more consumers getting on board. And
Yeah.
if more consumers had been able to use products like refined versions of Google Glass, of like Vuzix, they make like corporate and warehouse delivery AR systems. They have like funky Borg implants
Right.
that go on your glasses, but practical daily driver heads up display information. And up into companies like the Focals by North, none of this is fancy AR. People like you are gonna get left behind if we start with we need full HoloLens style augmented reality at $4,000 a pop.
So
The
here's
lens inserts for Apple Vision Pro that you will need to buy will be more expensive than buying 2 pairs of X Real Air glasses.
yeah, yeah, I know. And the thing is, though, and this is something I wanted to say as we got into this, is that yeah, Google had Google Glass, right?
Hmm.
And it never went wide. But
No.
of the people that I know who had experience with it, they said it was pretty cool.
It was
And
really cool.
the thing that
Yeah.
I liked about it was that it wasn't something that covered your whole face, impaired your ability to sort of interact with the world, but it was there, right?
Yeah.
And HoloLens for Microsoft
Hmm.
was another opportunity. And as soon as I saw Vision Pro in the keynote, I
Sure.
said, this could have been Google, this could have been Microsoft, but both of those companies, for whatever reason they did, they punted on continuing to develop that technology, right?
Yeah.
HoloLens, that the Xbox One came with
Connect.
the Kinect that was
Hmm.
HoloLens capable, and they never developed it any further. Like by the time we were halfway through the life cycle of the Xbox One, they had booted the Kinect off the boat.
So I think we're mixing a lot of different types of technologies.
Hmm.
I think this is another example of how bad Apple is at educating their consumers. Because you go back to that keynote and Tim Cook walks out on stage, and the first things he says is AR, augmented reality, is a profound technology. And the Vision Pro is not augmented reality.
Right.
It's a mixed reality headset. It is
Hmm.
using cameras
Yeah.
and using very high quality cameras to scan and pull all this information into a display. You're not actually looking out.
Right.
You're looking at a display that's representing the world around you.
Yeah.
We have a word for that. It's not spatial computing, it's mixed reality. It's a VR headset with cameras pointing out as opposed to putting up satellites
Right.
in your room like the original Oculus and the original HTC Vive.
I
So,
remember I had my assistant at the time when I was still had my job, and when I had the Oculus and
yeah,
I got the boxes, he found a design and 3D printed me some mounts for my for my wall, and I was like, okay, this is cool. But
yeah,
yeah, it's and I agree. It is mixed reality, and I think that one thing that people, they see the glasses sort of like open up when someone approaches, right? And
sure.
then, then it looks like it's just
But
goggles.
it's a mixed reality headset
Yeah,
with a very unsettling and uncanny valley animation of what your face looks like under the glasses.
yeah,
Whereas HoloLens is open glass
right.
with lenses that project images into the real space in
Mm-hmm.
front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so HoloLens never really went away.
Right,
HoloLens, you can still go and buy a dev kit
right,
today. Microsoft, I think, correctly saw like the amount of money and infrastructure and technology to bring real, true, not mixed reality, augmented reality to the masses is an order of magnitude more difficult than science fiction makes it look like. All these
oh
techies that
yeah,
leave comments on our videos, I think they really believe that in like 5 years we'll put in contacts and then just see cyborg vision all over the place. And let me tell you, that is not happening. That is not coming in the length of time that you think it will. It's
see,
going to be a much longer process to get us there. But the situation is if a company can't learn how to make those systems and make money learning how to make those systems, then the systems never get made. So
right.
Microsoft, instead of really trying to push a consumer experience, they went mixed reality for consumers and
Mm-hmm.
augmented reality for the military. And
Right,
that's where they're making money, and that's where we're still seeing some really exciting advancements in location computing, augmented reality, and really interacting with objects in your environment. But we're still years away from you just being able to put on, a comfortable, sleek pair of glasses and experiencing the world that
right,
way. We won't get there until a mass of consumers start putting face displays on.
right.
We can't get there. We have to learn how to make those systems. Jason, it is current year. And it is still very difficult for a huge swath of the population to find in ear earbuds that comfortably fit.
Yeah,
Audio is an easy technology to understand, and we've been working on headphones for over a century. The ability to put lenses and screens in front of your eyes is an order of magnitude more difficult than putting an earbud in your ear, and we still can't get earbuds right.
Yeah. Well, and you're right, and I think that part of that probably has to do with what you just pointed out, the fact that the amount of infrastructure and research and everything else that goes into it. People ask me like, "Oh man, that's the Vision Pro is $3,500. Like that's ridiculous." And I'm like, "Well, think
It
about
is.
what they're trying to do."
But
So
what are they trying to do?
well, okay, a lot of this is probably me extrapolating what.
See, they came out with these broad feel statements, and we're pouring into what we hope they'll do. I hope Apple can pull this stuff off, but what did they really show us, and what did they really talk about? And it's basically an iPad-like experience in a mixed reality headset with
Yeah.
some better gesture controls for your fingers, that the second you do anything more advanced, you've got to move to other hardware.
Well, and that's
Like,
that's the
you
interesting
you've
thing.
got to add to it. Oh,
And
you don't have bulky controllers like those other VR headsets, but the second you play a game, got to pick up some controllers.
yeah,
So the actual practical
you could
usage
pick up
is
your
already
Apple TV remote.
misrepresented by what Apple showed us in the keynote.
But so for me, and again, this is extrapolating
Sure,
probably
for sure.
to a degree beyond what we will see day one.
As techies, we are often optimistic,
Yeah.
and we wear our hearts on our sleeves.
Or we could be incredibly pessimistic, right? I mean,
No, I mean, I like talking to you because we have hope for humanity in the
yeah.
future, and we want to see this stuff do well. So no, I'm with you on the optimism side of this for
So
sure.
so I see Vision Pro as the natural extension of what we already have. If you
Okay.
told me 20 years ago that we would in 20 years be using the iPhone or Android phones of whatever ilk
Hmm.
as like tiny pocket computers that can do anything that we could possibly hope that they could do, I would have been like, I don't
Sure.
even know what that means, right?
I
you
know.
you know,
Yeah.
so I think you're right. The sort of lead time for something like the Vision Pro is longer term than what the average person might think,
Sure.
and what Apple like might want to represent to us.
Well, and also Vision Pro is being presented as a technology to a vast audience, but it's a dev kit, and we know their
Yeah,
first year they're only going to be able to build 100,000 of these. So why would we talk about Vision Pro in any way different than how you were just talking about HoloLens?
right.
You can buy a dev kit for HoloLens right now. Like, you can go to Microsoft.com and pick one up. So why is that any different than Vision Pro?
Well, this is where we get into what Apple does really well.
Market
They
and
market it.
misrepresent their competitors.
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think that Apple has decided, since they've had their their most successful products have been consumer-based products that, if you look at the iPhone, the Mac,
Mm-hmm.
the iPod, the iPad, like their most
Sure.
successful products have been consumer-facing products that,
Mm-hmm.
the iPhone OG was,
A terrible phone.
yes,
It was a
but
good iPod and it was a terrible phone.
right, but it was sort of proof of concept,
Sure.
but at the same time, like, it was prohibitively expensive for the time.
For its time.
Yeah. And so, like, I've got my Pixel Fold here. This
Sure.
thing's $1,800.
Yeah,
The
same.
the original iPhone was like $2,000 in 2007, right?
Okay.
So they have this. They've taken these products to these consumer facing products, and they've ended up developing them along the way. I think that Vision Pro is going to be more polished than we probably think it will be, but nowhere near what it
We
ultimately will be.
we can guess, and what's frustrating is, boy howdy, the few people who have been able to put the headset on their faces have been pretty locked down in talking about what that experience has been like.
Yep.
And regularly you'll hear people very vaguely say, "Oh, this is so cool and does this and that," and you're like, "Oh, I got like super motion sick," but don't worry about that, they'll fix that. And you're like, right now this year you can buy a $1,200 HTC Vive XR and it will not have a face screen for
Right.
people to look you in the digital uncanny eyes. The hand gestures are definitely not going to be quite as smooth or as polished as I'm sure what Apple will put out, but it's a functional, ready to go mixed reality headset, fully self contained. You don't have a stupid battery dongle, and it's a $1,200 headset.
See,
So Apple's strategy, and this is something like at some point you should talk to Dr. Ian over at Tech Potato, because like as he talks about like the silicon industry, Apple has this reputation for going to everybody else's stuff, cribbing their notes, and then contributing nothing to the standards around the world. And I feel Apple is kind of falling into their own trap here. Because I really
right,
want Vision Pro to take off because Apple is the only one that can generate the headlines. So if Vision Pro is a flop, that hurts all of us who are into mixed reality. It
right.
sucks that we are going to be dragged down with them. If Apple can't figure it out, no one can figure it out. When we've got these amazing products you can go and buy today and
Right.
do cool things with, but techies on YouTube have said, no, wait, Apple will do it right. No, wait, don't buy now. No, wait, Apple's always the better version, even though they're late to the party. So
See,
this is my frustration with how Apple sucks all the air out of the room, because you now have an entire market of consumers who are miseducated. These products have been misrepresented for what the reality of this technology looks like today.
and that's kind of, well, so I have the benefit of having at least probably experience with half of what's out there and available, right?
Right.
So I at least have a sense of what is possible. Like I was looking at the Meta Quest Pro, right?
Sure.
And they dropped the price, so it's $1,000. And I was thinking to
Mm-hmm.
myself, like, oh, maybe I'll check that out. And but then I really like dug deep and did some video watching and some research on what the Quest Pro was really capable of,
Yeah.
and it's just not there. And to me, that's sort of been the uncanny valley of VR and AR, is the fact that maybe it's because VR has focused so much on games. And at one point
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, games are probably the entry point for VR. But
Yeah. They're really easy for people to understand.
and but then my experience with VR has been very mixed. And
Right.
and so now the Quest 2 is probably the best representation of what VR can do in
I
terms of,
disagree.
well, I mean, in terms of what it can do now in a consumer space. Um, I
Again,
didn't,
I feel like VR and AR and mixed reality (MR) are so Wild West. There isn't one.
yeah,
You know, again, like when we go back to the original iPhone, we can't forget that there was a huge market of feature phones
right.
that Apple was able to kind of build off of. VR does not exist in that broad consumer mindshare. I'm still putting goggles and glasses and lenses on people today who do not have the language to describe what they see.
Right.
Like, this is so unbelievably unfamiliar. The last day of my daughter's school, she just finished up first grade. We're getting ready for second grade, but at the beginning of the summer, and I had my Steam Deck and my Rokid Max,
Hmm.
and the kids are freaking out. They're playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles out in the park on a sunny day, but on like a movie theater projected
Right.
screen out in space in front of them. Only one parent, out of all this gaggle of kids, only one parent tried it. And she comes up to me and she says, "Oh, are these like 2D?" And like, I don't I don't know what you mean. They're glasses. They're like a projection screen.
The only
They're kind
reference
of like
point,
reality. So she just kept repeating, but I mean, like, not like 3D. I mean, they're like 2D. I'm like, okay, do you want to try a game? And she's like, no, not really. And like, I've got Tetris, I've got Mario, I've got all these old games too. Oh, I love Tetris. And I put them on her face, and that woman gamed for like 30 minutes. All these kids like, I want to turn. And this mom's like elbowing them off. She takes them off her face and she goes back over to the other moms that are hanging out the last day of school, and she cannot conceptualize
Right.
in words what that was like. So if you were looking at the OG iPhone, you could say iPod plus feature phone.
Right.
Today, we don't have that. And as much as we can try and share, like I've used an Oculus, I've used a Vive, I've used the Steam, the Valve Index,
Yes.
it doesn't matter. I've put these X-Real Airs on my face. Until you've put the X-Real Airs on your face, you don't really know what they're like. I can tell you, and I can come up with a stupid cutesy animation in my video to sort of simulate what it's like, and it's not like that at all.
No,
So
I've
when you're
struggled
talking about all
mightily.
this stuff,
Yeah.
one of the things I would say is like you're talking about all this stuff and you're looking at the Vision Pro, but like have you looked at the HTC, the new Elite, the XR Elite or whatever it's
No,
called? And it's like a $1,200 headset. It's got built-in diopters. It's a fully
Yeah.
contained compute unit, just like the Oculus, but HTC's been doing this for a while. So the way that you cool the chips internally is also routed through the goggles for the user.
Right.
So
Right.
you don't get the sweat pools under your eyes like the older mixed reality headsets. The
Yeah.
battery is contained into the weight and the balance and the distribution of the headset. I mean, like for $1,200, it's doing all of the user stuff that the $3,500 Vision Pro is promising in an actual platform, in an actual environment, with cross compatibility with other compute devices that you can use it with, and it's ready to go today. And
Right.
you won't spend a penny more if you've got funky eyes. You
Right.
don't have to put in the lens inserts. It's built into the product.
Right.
It's already got business grade software for collaboration and CAD and spreadsheets and presentations and all that stuff. It's not a promise. It's here now. And it's
Yeah,
a third the cost.
and this is actually the first I've heard of some of the stuff that's been coming down the line, and I'd been following the Meta because of the Meta Quest Pro. I really wanted to sort of see
But
what that
isn't
was
it just like
capable of.
techies? Because if it's not Apple, the only conversation we'll entertain is what's the cheapest.
Right.
So as soon as something else comes out that's more expensive than an Oculus, well, I mean, why would you buy that? I mean, even if it's better, the Oculus is like $300 and Facebook will just steal all your user data. But for some reason, we're fine with Apple defining their own value. Everyone else, it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, I think that, well, Apple has taken their share of grief for the pricing of the
they
Vision
though?
Pro. Yeah, well, I mean,
Do you see articles about the do you know anything about the HTC Vive?
I really
You heard it
haven't
was an
seen it yet.
expensive mixed reality headset.
No,
if
this is
anyone's heard about it, if
yeah.
they've heard about it, that's what they've heard.
Well, I
And
mean, I
there
guess-
is not the same breathlessness of it's so expensive, but Apple. There's
Yeah.
always the but in media coverage where even if they're getting tagged for something that's really expensive, they are not questioned on why it's expensive.
Well-
Whereas immediately, if it's something else like an Index or an XR or like the Samsung Odyssey was really good, but it was more expensive than the Acer. Well, I have the Acer. The Acer was a plasticky piece of garbage that the hinge broke if you looked at it cross-eyed, but it was $200 less.
Yeah.
So why would you get that Samsung Odyssey that was built better? So
Well-
we have so much education to do for an experience that consumers are completely unfamiliar with, and our media is basically just helping promote Apple's marketing bullet points. They're not doing their job in bringing people up to speed.
I think a lot of that though has to do with, again, like perceived value.
Sure.
So Apple has done an incredible job of creating a market for themselves where the perceived value of an Apple product is greater. And in a lot of ways, like unibody MacBooks and all this stuff, like these are high quality, like that's a high quality.
Until you pull up a channel like Louis Rossmann and he can show you how unibody wasn't, that was a lie. Butterfly keyboards, constant failures, flex damage on all of the old iPhones. Even after the iPhone 6 stopped bending,
Right.
that was still a flexion point on the phones that caused myriad numbers of problems. None of that makes it back out. Every time you talk to an Apple techie, this is always a surprise. This is always a shock because they're not looking for problems, but these things exist. And then people think like, oh, well, maybe I just had some issue with mine. And then years after the problem has kind of worked its way out of the market, then there's a class action lawsuit that Apple fights for years, and eventually you get $20 back in a settlement because your MacBook was a piece of garbage. And the media never picks up on that thread. When Apple delivers something at scale and there's a problem, they are the only company who can hurt as many people as Apple can when there's a problem with one of their products. And our outrage or our scrutiny should scale with the potential for harm. If OnePlus does something bad, we're talking hundreds of thousands of units a year, maybe a million. If Apple does something bad, we're talking hundreds of millions of potential problems in a given year.
Well, okay. Let me try and present the counterpoint for that. I mean, because yes, the butterfly keyboard was a poor design, and it did fail, right?
Unibody wasn't unibody. Screens broke.
But okay,
screens broke. That's not unibody. That was a lie.
Okay, but that's not the point that I'm making.
Okay.
The point that I was making was about the materials overall, the aluminum versus plastic, that you would get for a PC that was much cheaper. And you could say, oh, the PC laptop is much cheaper, but then when you take it home, I mean, I had this experience personally years and years ago. I didn't want to spend the money on a MacBook because it was like slightly outside of what I could afford, right?
Sure.
So I bought an HP laptop. Yeah. More features, more power, more battery, more blah 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 blah, right?
Right.
And the thing is, like, I took it home, I opened it up, I started to set it up, and then it just died. It just died. And I was like, at that time, PC laptops have become much better over time, but at that time, this would have been like 2008 or 2009. Right. I was just like, I'm not going to fuck with this. You know?
But the corollary to that is better consumer education, and especially for someone like you, who you would have appreciated the injection molded magnesium frame of a ThinkBook. I mean, not a ThinkBook, a ThinkPad. If you had gone Lenovo, IBM, I forget exactly when Lenovo bought that series of laptops, but like I had T200s that lasted decades. I had the swivel. That was the one that had the funky hinge where the screen would like fold back over. And after I swapped out the built-in hard drive for an SSD, that thing went on for like 15 years, and I didn't even have to do a battery replacement. So that's the problem with consumer education is you go into a Best Buy and some idiot says, oh, this one's got more features, and then you get a plasticky piece of garbage. But if you cared about build materials, you would have been better off with a business grade machine, and it would have been a comparable price point to a MacBook that also did not misrepresent the quality of the build that Apple tried to do when they called it unibody, and there were solder and weld points on the hinge and the laptop and the screen hinge. Like that kind of stuff should have been pushed back against by a larger media presence, but we never hear about those kinds of issues with Apple products.
Okay, so as I was saying, I took it back. Well, see, part of the problem is living where I live. I don't really have the option to, other than like mail order, to go and get a business grade PC laptop like a ThinkBook or something like that. The only way that most people ever would get their hands on a ThinkBook would be their office ordered it for them, right?
And like my wife, her company just swapped out, and she went from Surface laptops to HPs, or no, Surface laptops to Dells. And let me tell you, not as nice. Definitely not as well built.
Although I can
they're
say
definitely
this.
cheaper.
I can say this. So when I worked at the medical school at the University of Iowa, I started working there the year that they, for the first time, allowed students, or actually required students, to buy their own laptops that met the specs necessary to be able to take their tests. Because the test, like they had carts of laptops that were only for testing, right?
Yeah.
And so they moved away from those, and they said to the students, like, okay, you can get your own laptop. It has to have these specs. It has to have, this stuff. And a lot of the students went with a Surface, like a Microsoft Surface Pro.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on its face, you would think, take notes with the pen. You've got a really
Yeah.
nice, like,
It's a
clam
really flexible platform, and it can do tablet-y things and
yeah.
laptop-y things. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many students in the time that I was there, and Surface Pros have gotten better. I bought a Surface Pro 9 that
So when was this roughly? Like Surface Pro 2?
this would have been like 2011, 12. So yeah, Surface Pro 2, Surface Pro 3 was the first one that I got.
I think Surface Pro 3 was the one where I felt like you could really take it seriously.
Yeah. So I had a lot of students though who invested a bunch of money in that and ended up, having tons of problems. And whether it was headphone jack died or connectivity with the screens would lose. I don't know if they would delaminate from the touch. So I had tons of people like always complaining about their Surface Pros.
Sure.
And but I also know, and this is where I think there's perceived value in certain things. So we've got magnesium with the Surface Pro. We've got a aluminum with the MacBook. And I had students who also showed up with MacBook Airs from, 2008. And they're still using their 2008 MacBook Pro as their fourth year medical students ready to go into residency, and they're like,
sure,
maybe I'll buy myself another computer. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that by and large, my experience with Apple, with Mac computers and Apple products in general has been, there's a few things. They hold value
sure,
better, whether or not that's like because of the perception that people have of the quality of but
it is.
But as a consumer, like, so when I went to Best Buy to get that computer, right?
Sure.
And my choice was PC laptop, anywhere from $200 to $900, right?
Okay.
This would have been, like I say, like 2008, 2009.
Sure.
Or the only other option was Mac.
Mm-hmm.
So when I had problems with the PC, and I had just come
HP.
Yeah, well, I had just come off of. So the full story is, when I went to when I went to grad school, I couldn't afford a MacBook.
Okay.
And so I bought an HP that was like, it had its own, the HP that Marquez Brownlee reviewed in his very first ever review.
Okay.
It had a little remote control, and it had like Bang & Olufsen speaker system, and it was
okay.
It was supposed to be like top of the middle or bottom of the high end, right?
All right.
And so I spent what I could on that, and my experience with that was okay. But 3 years into using it, it just crawled to a halt.
Right.
And I didn't know enough about PCs at the time to really be able to say, like, okay, I can like change out the hard drive, or I can, go through and do these things. So that's when I went to and replaced that computer with the HP,
which is my example of the uncle we always know who says like, oh, this MacBook is so much better than my old Dell, where I bought a practical machine for a certain price point and then ran it for years until it started to slow down.
Right.
And then I replaced it with something more expensive, the perceived value, something nicer. And that's the mental comparison that so many consumers are making. They're not comparing the quality of machine that would have been comparable to the MacBook. They're comparing their memories of using an older product that was purchased for a practicality and a lower price point against something that's newer and nicer and a little spendier.
But the point,
and that's a consumer education issue, not You know,
So
like I don't go and compare my old 1998 Toyota Corolla to like some of the EVs that we were talking about. Like
right.
they're different animals and they're
Well,
built for different purposes and they were sold for different demographics at different prices for different practicalities.
so I feel like what I'm trying to say is getting lost in the weeds here. But um
For sure. It's
my
easy for us to like tangent our way through these
well,
conversations.
my
Absolutely.
so what I was doing at that time was I had a little bit more money, so I was buying a
Sure.
little bit better PC. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the PC I was buying was $1,000, and the MacBook
Okay.
that I could have bought was 1,300. But that
Okay.
extra
That's a
three,
30% price difference.
right?
You're giving Apple a 30% advantage in this example.
I
Even though it's
understand.
hypothetical and we're not talking about real products, Apple already has a 30% lead in your comparison where we're going to go. Please
Right.
continue.
So my user experience right off the bat with the first thing that I bought was poor. The
Sure.
quality of the materials was poor. The
Sure.
experience using the product was poor. And of course, this was still like, I think this was still like Windows Vista, if I recall. So like the quality of the operating system was poor.
Was poor. Sure.
And so I had an overall bad experience, to the point where I was just like not even willing to try and make it work after a day or two. Went
Sure.
back, got the MacBook, and sort of stretched myself to the place where I could afford the lower end
Mm-hmm.
MacBook, and then had a great experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't attribute that only to like Apple having a
Spending.
perceived value.
No, that you are attributing it to an actual market value and a newer product. So going from like a $900 HP to stretching yourself to like a $1,300 MacBook, I think most people would say, hey, if I bought a thing and then years later I bought a more expensive thing, we would hope
No, but
that the more
this
expensive
was like
thing.
within 2 days of itself. Like so I
You
bought
mean
the
going from the $900
yeah. So
HP to the
yeah,
$1,300
yeah.
MacBook, which is now we're talking about almost a 50%
Well,
price hike.
just remember that these are not the actual numbers. I'm
No, I
just
know, but we're but ballparking it
yeah.
and
So
allowing for the fog of memory. If you bought one car and it was not as good, and then you spent 50% more on another car, you would expect it to be nicer.
so okay. Again, like I feel like what I'm saying is getting twisted around here a little bit, in the sense that like I bought the most expensive PC that I could buy, right?
Well, but it
So
wasn't the most expensive PC that you could buy. It was the most expensive PC that you wanted to afford at that time. If you're
well,
saying it was like a $900 HP, there were ThinkPads back then, and there were Dells, and
but
there
not
were
available to
other.
me.
But that's what I'm saying is this is now a part of that consumer education where if your experience hinged on some of these things that made the Apple a nicer device, the opportunities and the ability for you to experience that is not a fault of IBM Lenovo. That's a fault of Best Buy stocking products that move off the shelves. And what moves off the shelf. It's the same thing that like in an Apple keynote, we'll see the bar graph and it's like, well, the new M2 processor is 500 times more performant than the best selling laptop on Amazon from Windows. And what's the best selling laptop on Amazon from Windows? It's like a $300 netbook. So that's the psychology at play. So unfortunately, where you were in your inability to get your hands on one of those products just by going to a brick and mortar store doesn't change the reality of a comparable product probably would have gotten you closer to a comparable experience. But a cheaper, lesser than product, which was all you could really get your hands on in that store, colored your perception of Mac versus PC in a very direct way, even though there's a 40% price difference between the two products that you had to
Okay,
experience.
you kind of made up the 40% price difference, but
If it's $900 to
no,
$1,300, what is
I said let's just say
I know.
$1,000
Let's
to
just say
300. So okay, you
so
can say
then
30%,
30%.
and that and
But you
again,
started the conversation out saying it was about a $900 HP. That's where you started. We can check the tape.
yes, no,
In,
I know that
going
that's
like a half hour
okay.
back.
Let's take this. Okay, if that's the case, let's take this away from my experience. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not being beholden to something that was just a ballpark guess, right?
Okay.
And just say that the best experience I had available to me on a PC was not good. So I went and got the comparable MacBook. Now
But
it was
that's not
more.
what you. But you didn't.
I
It's not
did.
the comparable MacBook because they didn't sell a MacBook at that. See, that's what we can't separate, Jason. It's like you can't go and tell me these two cars are comparable, but one's significantly more expensive than the other. You can't detach that from the conversation when we're talking about how these companies represent their products. So
I
if we're
mean,
talking about
but the thing
perceived
is, like,
value, and one company says like, hey, for the perceived value of this, it's a 30% price difference, then that's not the same. And you can't tell that to someone who's got a budget. Hey, you had $900 for a laptop, just spend $1,300. That's never advice that we can give.
but my point is, and I feel like we're having two different arguments.
Okay,
I feel like we're having two different arguments because
right,
for me, I needed to solve a problem,
sure.
right?
And you had two products in a brick and mortar store, and they're not comparable. And one was more expensive than the other.
Now I
And the more
didn't.
expensive one was the nicer experience.
I never said that they were comparable.
That's what you just said.
No,
You
I
you
didn't.
you, you
I
tried
did
to walk
not
it
say
back, and
that.
you just
I
said,
did not say
I,
they
I
were
went and got
comparable.
this HP. We can go back and check the tape.
No, see
You
what
used the word. So I had
you're
two options in front of
interpreting.
me.
What I was saying is
No,
that
you used the word comparable, which is why I used the word comparable. I went and I bought an HP, and it
no. If I
wasn't
was going
good,
to
so I
talk
went
about
back to the
comparable, I
store
would have
and I
talked about
got
a
the
MacBook Pro.
comparable. And I got the comparable MacBook. That's what you said.
I meant comparable in price. Because if I was going to get the comparable, like if that was supposed to be a top end HP, right?
Sure.
And I wanted to get the comparable Apple product,
Right.
I would have had to go get whatever their highest end laptop was available at that store.
No, no. See, this is where we're conflating words like flagship. Is this a
No, no.
flagship phone? Well, it's the best phone this company puts out. But is that the same as the flagship from a more expensive company? So I'm talking about budget. You're talking about the best product that company makes. So if the best product that company makes is a plasticky $1,000 piece of garbage, and the best product Apple puts out is a $1,300 metal-bodied laptop, those are still not comparable.
But that
And
wasn't.
consumers aren't going to
But
compare
see,
them because
here's
a
what.
consumer with $1,000 isn't going to say, I guess I just need to spend $1,300 to have the same tier of product. That's not
But
how
that's
people
what you're
think.
that's what you're misrepresenting here. Is that I'm not saying I'm buying the same tier of product. I'm
Right.
saying comparable in the
But
sense
you're
of
using
price.
of its but it's not Jason.
No,
Okay, we got to stop because you're talking past two different points. And one point is it the best product a company makes? And the other point is what is the price of that product?
well,
So how are they comparable? They're comparable if it's these are the two best laptops I could buy. The best from HP and the best from Apple. Now
but
we can use a word like
I never
comparable.
said the best from Apple.
Well, but still,
No, no,
go
no.
with me on at
I mean,
least
I
getting
think
no, no, no. Go with me on at least getting the because we're going to talk past each other until we define the terms here. So the HP isn't even the best that HP was selling at
correct,
that time. It was just the
correct,
best you had access to.
correct.
And so that, let's say, was $1,000. Okay.
Yeah,
So the best HP you had access to is being compared against not the best that Apple can sell.
right.
Are we in agreement?
Yes.
So that's where you're using a word like comparable.
And when I said comparable, what I was talking about was in terms of the price range. That's
Now it's a price range.
so everybody, like when you buy something, you buy something that's within a range of price, right?
Sure.
So the decision that I made was,
Hmm.
okay, I'll buy the most expensive PC laptop from HP,
Available to you.
available to me in this
Right.
store
In this
because
store.
I don't have anywhere else to go.
Right.
And I got that, had a poor experience, brought it back, got what was comparably priced from Apple, right?
Okay. But
But
it wasn't.
baking in the fact that I know the Apple product is more expensive, right?
See, no. Wait. Well, so this is where I
Which
feel
is
this
why I didn't buy the
conversation
Apple product in the first place.
is breaking down. When I'm putting out numbers based on your recollection of the range, we're giving Apple a really wide range.
But it's not at the fault of
Your
Apple.
recollection started at $900, and then your recollection of the Apple was stretching yourself to like 1300.
Right.
So that is a $400 range. And that's my point. We're looking at the prices. I don't care where the company positions the product in their lineup. I hate this fake debate of smartphones. Is it a flagship phone? Because that word doesn't mean anything. The only thing consumers are going for are pricing or what their carrier is going to serve them. So the price tier is what matters to me. And I don't know a lot of people that can stretch their budget 40% in a range, or 30%, giving it even just a little bit narrower. $1,000 to $1,300 is a 30% range, where $300 for a laptop back then would have gone a long way in improving the build materials, improving the experience, enhancing the storage, giving you more RAM. That's a different animal, going 1,000 to 1,300. And that's where I have a problem with the way that we present Mac versus PC or Android versus iPhone. So we get caught up in this brand back and forth where someone will say, like, I had a Samsung and it was garbage, so I bought an iPhone. And you're like, you had a Galaxy A50 and you're comparing it against an iPhone 12. Like, yeah, that's a twice as expensive phone. It's going to be a better phone. If
And
you
I
have a
don't
$1,000 laptop and a $1,300 laptop, brand labels notwithstanding, that's going to be a significant difference in the quality of machine that you can buy.
but the overall
They're
point,
not comparable in tier, and they're not comparable in price.
okay, they were the two choices I had.
Yes.
Let's forget that I've
And
ever said
that's
comparable.
unfortunate. That's unfortunate because if you had access to something more business grade, your PC experience would have been better. But you
Except
also
for
still would have spent
Windows
more.
Vista.
Yeah, even then. Because even on top of that, you would have. So the big problem with Windows Vista wasn't that it was a terrible operating system. It was a bad operating system, but it was at that time we were going through the Intel and AMD machinations on like going from Pentium 3 to Pentium 4 and the changes in architecture. And we had all these systems that were grossly underpowered, but they were still sitting on store shelves. We had all these components sitting in warehouses, but we couldn't get them moved through the door. And this is one of the ugliest aspects of like the PC industry at that time. But I think Microsoft caved to those manufacturers' pressure to say, you know what, this is a Vista capable machine at its like bare minimum, and Vista's gonna run like garbage. Really, Vista, you gotta step it up. So if you had access to that ThinkPad at $1,300, your Vista experience would have been significantly better for a more powerful machine with more RAM and more storage space to better utilize what Vista was doing.
So
Like I was in there all in the days of like Longhorn. You remember when we had like all those like fancy like transparency effects and chrome finishes and like windows that could
oh
like
yeah, yeah,
tile and flip and all that stuff? You can't do that on the bare minimum system spec that you could have with Windows XP.
right.
So all of that immediately cratered. And that painted the PC industry in a really bad light, which is where we've kind of informed that consumer idea of Mac has this higher perceived value and PCs are garbage. But if you ran them on comparably powerful systems, Vista really was a nice, pretty operating system. It just was put on low-end spec systems that it had no business. Those should have been Windows XP computers, or at least some flavor of Windows 2000.
So, and this is where it's interesting to me, because I think part of the problem, and like you said, Microsoft maybe caved to
Oh, they definitely did. I mean, again, Microsoft deserves so much ire for letting those Vista capable stickers go out. They never should have let that happen.
But I think this is also, and maybe this is like, I think Apple built this perceived value on a couple of pillars. Well, a few pillars. One of which being that Apple, being a vertically integrated company, always had control over the manufacture of the product, all the materials that went into it, but they also had control over all of the software that ran it.
Yeah.
And they only had to make it optimized for their hardware. I mean, that's, when John Scully took over Apple and they kicked Steve Jobs out, and they started making beige boxes and
they
licensing
the
software
and printers and stuff like that.
And they licensed the software out to third-party manufacturers to make Macintoshes, right? It was a total disaster.
Yeah, it was bad.
And I think that part of that is part of what happens in the Windows sphere, is that it doesn't happen as much now, because I feel like the overall quality of materials, so several years later, I want to say like 10 years later, I bought my wife a 17-inch Toshiba laptop that was on that row that was on that row at Best Buy of everything is like less than $500.
Yeah.
I bought her that. She has very minimal requirements for what she needs to be able to do with her computer.
Sure. That's why $500 computers exist.
Yeah, and she used the crap out of that thing, right? And so I feel like from that point, maybe 10 years ago or slightly in that same range, Windows computers kind of started to catch up. And
well, Windows computers were always there, but they were the same price or more expensive.
But what I'm saying is,
just because you couldn't buy one doesn't mean they didn't exist. And like I was saying, I had T200s running Windows XP that handled Windows Vista perfectly well. But those were incredibly expensive laptops. But you could take them completely apart and upgrade them and clean them, and they were designed to be rolled out for IT departments. They were business grade, but they lasted so much longer than anything else through multiple operating system updates. But you did not have access to them at Best Buy where you lived.
Right.
So again, we're kind of giving Apple sort of a rosier history, because Apple's never sold a cheap computer. The cheapest would have been like clamshells and G3s. And if you want to talk about Apple as a vertical, those PowerPC days were nightmares for Apple consumers. Yeah. They were the worst. So even when Apple does have the benefit of this vertical, it doesn't always work out that they've got the best solution in a market. So that's the big hook here, is like so many people have had experiences on those terrible netbooks, on those inexpensive, you can still buy like $300 Windows PCs and laptops on Amazon. They're not going to be nice. But that's not PC versus Mac. That's inexpensive versus expensive.
Right.
And if you buy expensive to expensive and they're comparably priced, you're going to have it's a better potential for that to be a more directly relatable experience. Like I've got a Razer Blade over here, GTX 970. I think it was the 2013 or 2014 year laptop. It's technically not going to get an update to Windows 11. This thing is still a beast today, and it's better than any MacBook that I would have bought at that time for the price. So
let me ask you
the
this,
MacBook would have been significantly more expensive for a less performant machine that would not have lasted me as long.
The Razer Blade is the one exception to all of. I think that Razer Blades and MacBooks are comparable 1-to-1, because they have comparable power, right? and
but
they
to
have
your
comparable
example,
price.
but to your point, 10 years ago and longer, especially if you're talking about Windows Vista, because I think we're also forgetting how far back Windows Vista actually was. I think
Well,
we're
yeah,
doing the
yeah.
thing like, you know, like 10 years ago in 1990.
No,
Um,
this would have been like 2008 or 2009.
okay, but back then we didn't have the Razer Blade.
No,
We had the ThinkPad.
right.
So you would
Well,
not have been able to buy the Razer Blade in your Best Buy, just walk up and grab it, just like you weren't able to go and buy the ThinkPad, but that computer existed. And that
yes.
computer could be sold. And that was a directly comparable price tier where I bet you that that ThinkPad probably could do things and was probably better upgradable, serviceable, and maintenanceable than the same price of a MacBook for its time.
I think one thing that might have gotten lost here is the fact that I wanted to buy the MacBook. Like that's what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted, but
For sure.
I didn't want to stretch
To the
to
budget.
those extra few $100s, right?
For sure.
So
Well, a
I
few $100s is a lot of money.
well, okay, but let's keep it within like the scope of like my shopping experience and
Sure.
my goals, right? Like I could have spent it, but I would have
And you
preferred not to.
ultimately did.
I
Yeah.
ultimately did. I wanted to buy the MacBook. I bought something else instead because it would
That's
it
what you had.
the perception that I had looking at the little stickers on there that say all
Sure.
the different features that it has and all the blah 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 and
Mm-hmm.
all that other kind of stuff, more battery life, da da da. You know, it had one of those big honking batteries that made it sit up further and like all that
Yeah.
stuff. You know, so I'm getting the perception. This is what happens a lot of times with Windows computers
Mm-hmm.
is you instead of like you get a Mac, you know you're getting a Mac. It's running Mac OS and it doesn't have pen support. It doesn't have like all this other stuff, right?
Sure.
But as you go up the line with Windows PCs, at least at that time, you could get more features and so you perceive that you're getting a better value because you're getting more features for less money, right?
Sure.
Ultimately, the experience that I had was
Mm-hmm.
poor. And
I
so
believe you.
and so I went and got the MacBook, which I didn't want to get the cheapest MacBook because I realized that it wasn't gonna be as performant as the MacBook that I could never afford, or at least that I couldn't afford at that time, right?
Sure.
Um, but I still would prefer to be on that operating system working on that hardware. And so I went and got the other thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a good experience. And
Right.
what I'm saying is whether I think that Apple earned that reputation because whether or not the value is there, I knew that I could buy an Apple computer
Right.
and I knew what to expect from it in terms of build quality and software support
Sure.
and those kinds of things.
And that is exactly what I'm saying, where your experience is a great example of a lack of consumer education in the market.
But see, I don't think that had there been
You were educated on what a Mac could do, and you were not aware of the ThinkPad.
so I think though,
That is an education that
I mean,
helps
I was
inform the
aware of
consumer
ThinkPads,
to
but
buy.
they also they, as you said, like I was aware of ThinkPads. I had seen them
Sure.
before, but I'd never seen them outside of like the lap of a banker on an airplane.
Right.
So I think if there had been a ThinkPad there for the same price as a MacBook, I wouldn't have bought it
Yeah.
because
But it would have addressed all of the issues that you're talking about.
because
And this is where the consumer education, and when we give them better options and we give them better data to make informed purchases, they're less likely to just buy a PC that's not going to fit their needs, go, oh, this didn't work. I better get a Mac. And we see this a lot in tech commentary where people buy products that don't really service what they need them to do and then kind of shrug and go, well, I'll go with the It Just Works company. But that also means we're leaving out strategic and market specific recommendations for people where they probably would have gotten a better fit for their needs if we did a better job of bringing the level of tech education and the level of tech discourse up to a more user specific level. And Apple is not contributing to that conversation. Right now, Apple is clouding the waters on that kind of conversation, and it makes it much more difficult to untangle 40 years, multiple generations of Apple marketing to make sure consumers get the right fit today. We
Right.
should not be looking at the average sales price of an iPhone closing in on $1,000 as a victory. We do not know many people in our circles of family and friends who are really using $1,000 worth of smartphone. That is
Right.
not serving their needs. That is not helping them. And we are not being good educators in bringing the right products and services to their attention.
So, what if now I would have agreed with that argument prior to first the iPhone 10R and then later, I mean, even the original iPhone SE, but the iPhone 10R and then when they bifurcated the iPhone lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can get an iPhone SE is their quote unquote budget phone. It's more expensive than I'm not going to use the word comparable. It's more expensive than an Android phone of the same price. You know that, or
It's
it
it's more
you.
expensive than a similarly equipped Android phone.
However, the benefit that I think that something like an iPhone SE has
Mm-hmm.
is that even though it's lower priced than the iPhone 12 Pro Max,
Sure.
it still has the same chip, it runs on the same SoC as that, you know, that MacBook, the iPhone Pro Max that also costs
What
like
does the
$1,200.
iPhone SE top out at?
I
Let's look it
haven't.
up.
I think you can get one for $400, but I haven't.
iPhone SE 2022, right?
I believe that either that or 2021. It hasn't been too long.
Okay, so in 2022, come on, GSM Arena, you can load faster than that. So the main camera features, where is the chip? Platform. A15 Bionic. It's pretty good.
Yep.
So would you want to run an A15 Bionic on an iPhone SE battery?
I've never had a problem with.
No, Jason, don't do that. Look, think about all of the iPhone SE reviews that came out in 2022 and what was the major criticism? It was
Well, I mean,
running a high performance computer grade SoC on a tiny little battery. And that was one of the biggest differences between that and, say, like a Pixel A series at the time.
so I never
We
heard
can't.
it. I did.
No, don't do. I never heard. Come on, that
No,
was
no,
a
no, no,
part
no.
of
Let me finish
every
my
single
sentence before
iPhone
you
SE
trump it down. Let me
review.
finish my sentence before you trump on it. Okay. My point was what I was trying to say,
Sure.
whether or not it's a point or not. What I was trying
Right.
to say was I always equated, correctly or incorrectly, I don't know, is what I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
say, that the reason the iPhone SE battery life was lower was because
Mm-hmm.
the battery was smaller.
Well, but we also can but that's not in a vacuum. The iPhone SE is the iPhone 6.
Yeah.
Like the parts are almost
Well,
completely
it's the iPhone 8,
interchangeable.
but
6S, the
no,
circuit
I
board
mean
and the main
the body
board,
design is the
the body
iPhone
design
8.
changed, but they sculpted around the camera module. We're not talking about a radically different phone. What I'm talking about is you can pull iPhone 6S components out of an iPhone 6S and put them in an iPhone SE. So the underpinnings, the chassis, the engine, whatever metaphor we want to use for this, they're almost identical. And so we can compare the LTE version of this with the iPhone SE 2020, and we can compare that against the iPhone SE 2022. And you can do things like disable 5G, because if we remember, and especially with you back on an iPhone 12, this was the first year Apple put in 5G, and 5G was such a huge battery suck. We had carriers recommending to consumers to disable the 5G to improve their battery life because iPhone users had not experienced that kind of power draw and that kind of limited battery before. It was a marked step below the iPhone 11. And in that year, when we went from the iPhone 11 to the iPhone 12, if you normalized for the radio, the iPhone 12 was more performant, but it throttled faster. So if you wanted to play games, the iPhone 11 was better for playing games because the iPhone 12 would peak to a super high frame rate, get hot, and then throttle you back down below the sustained performance of the iPhone 11. So that's what we got in the iPhone SE 2022 was the smallest battery with the hottest chipset that Apple had produced and a 5G radio. And you're telling me someone wants a phone at $399, you can't tell me that they care about high performance on that tiny little display. They're not getting the advantage of high performance for the camera that's bolted onto the back of the SE. So you're not really making a better product for consumers. The consumers who are shopping at $399 want a daily driver communicator phone where a Pixel A series would have been a much better fit for their needs. Just buying in at $399 so you can get a cheap iPhone doesn't give you a better phone. It just means you get locked into Apple's ecosystem.
But see, I think that most people who would buy an SE would buy an SE because they want an iPhone.
Yes, but they're spending $399 on an iPhone.
So if you were to say like, okay, so
if you go to that person and you say, do you want an iPhone that you have to top off twice a day?
No, but that.
I mean, again, what you're talking about is absolutely correct. The marketing and the brand image, they want the Apple logo. But I don't know that it's just the
logo, though.
What? If it's not just the logo, tell me how is the iPhone SE the better phone? Because it's not a practical.
No, I'm not saying it's the better phone. That's
then
the thing.
Why are you buying it? You said so that because they want to own an iPhone.
Because
so that's the label. That's the Apple logo on the back of the phone.
But it's also the experience that they have with an iPhone. Like whether or not
the experience of owning the iPhone was better on the iPhone 11, and people were told to disable features on the iPhone 12 to replicate the experience on the iPhone 11.
You have to remember that in terms of 5G, I mean, we're talking 2000. Sure. We're talking 2018, right?
No, iPhone SE was 2022, and iPhone SE in this form factor was 2020 and 2022.
Yeah. So the original
so not 2018.
The original 2020 iPhone SE.
LTE.
Okay. When the 5G was introduced, and I said this often.
iPhone 12.
I said this often. Don't buy a phone because it has 5G.
Sure.
Because you can't use it.
Accurate.
I still don't have 5G where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like 3 years later, who knows when it's actually going to come.
Sure.
So I think part of the reason that, people were turning off the 5G radio was because
it was destroying their battery.
Well, but it was destroying their battery for no reason. Like
yes.
they weren't getting it.
Tell me what part of the Apple experience is that, Jason?
See, I feel like
Apple put out a product and out of the box.
I feel like you're cherry picking.
What am I cherry picking? You're saying they want to buy it because it's an iPhone and it's not just the label, it's the whole experience. And the experience of owning an iPhone SE 2022 in 2022 with limited 5G availability was a phone with the smallest battery, the hottest chip, and a 5G radio enabled out of the box. To the point where carriers told their customers to disable features on the phone to bring back the performance that they could have had with an iPhone iPhone SE 2020 or an iPhone 11. So I'm not cherry picking. I'm trying to say, what is it about the experience of a $399 iPhone SE 2022 was really a better experience for consumers than a comparably priced Pixel A series at $399 with a better camera, a much better screen, and significantly better battery life.
I mean, do you really want me to say it?
Nobody if it's iMessage, then that's it.
Nobody. If you're used to using an iPhone,
so it's just the familiarity.
Okay,
it's not that it's a better product. I'm happy to own a lesser product at the same price, just because I'm familiar with the UI.
Yeah.
So then that to me is an example of how we as techies have not really fulfilled the conversation
But
where someone could buy a better product for their needs
I'm never
if
going to
we
try
were
and convince
empowering them.
somebody who is a long-term iPhone user that just because this is a better spec'd phone, they
No,
should
what
buy
I
this
would do is I
instead.
would say, hey, stick with your iPhone 11s or your iPhone SE 2020. But that's not what videos were about. That's not what the tech
Oh no, but I'm not
conversation
having
about.
a
That's not what the
conversation.
media was
I'm not
about.
talking about what other people were saying. I mean, I'm not talking seriously. I'm not talking about what other people were saying. I'm trying to put myself inside the mindset of the
Sure.
consumer who would go to the store, right?
And as a part of that conversation, there are two things. If someone is coming to me and saying like, "Hey, I don't want to switch from Apple," I'm not going to switch them from Apple. I'm not that guy. But if someone's coming to me and they're saying like, "Hey, I need an inexpensive phone. I want it to have a good camera and I want to have good battery life and I want to have these good smart features, but it needs to be an all-day battery life performer." I'm not going to tell them stretch your budget and get a better iPhone. I'm going to say there is an option, but it requires you to switch.
Right.
The real option was go Pixel A series, or even at that year, I actually think the Galaxy A series would have been a reasonable solution too. I think the Pixel was the better phone in hindsight, but at the time that would have been solid also. But that's part of it. That's a consumer education conversation where we need to be empowered to say there's no reason for you to own $1,000 phone. But if you
Yeah.
really want to have a good phone in your budget that does these things well, it's not an iPhone SE. That's not the phone. But you have to be comfortable doing that. If you're not comfortable switching, buy an older iPhone. Don't buy a newer iPhone. And you'll save some money and you'll stay in the Apple ecosystem, and that's great. But you're telling me $399 and you want a brand new phone at the beginning of its life cycle, best possibility for long term support, all of that coverage, then there is an option there. There is an answer.
But it's the Pixel A.
Which is an awesome phone.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you, but I just
The Pixel 5a, just the year after, is still one of the all-time best. Daily runtime, excellent battery, great camera, has a headphone jack. I mean, it's like if
has
you're
a
looking
shitty
at what
headphone
the
jack though.
but anything under like Sony Xperia these days is going to be mediocre, but convenient, accessible, and reasonably good with things like noise and distortion. I've measured them all.
Yeah, no, I
It has a weak amp, but it's actually a pretty decent performer at audio quality given its ridiculously low price point. But that's also where we lose things because now there is no successor to the Pixel 5a. The Pixel 6a is a completely different animal.
yeah, I mean, and so well, that's an argument that I had to have with many people, or a conversation that I had to have with many people when they would say like, "Oh well, I can get a Pixel 4a or a 5a. It has a headphone jack,"
Mm-hmm.
and I had to explain many times that yes, you're getting a headphone jack, but you have to understand like what headphone jack you're getting. Like
Sure.
if you're talking about the difference between a used, again, we are making the same arguments about different things. You know, like I'm the thing is like I'm not going to die I'm not going to die on the hill of, a slightly less performant iPhone is not as good a buy as a Pixel
It's
A.
not. It's not a question of slightly less performant. It's about right tool for the right job. An iPhone SE 2022 is a markedly more powerful phone than a Pixel 4a 5G. No debate. It's
Right.
a Snapdragon 700 series chip against an A15. Would you dump a twin turbocharged V8 into a 1980s Honda Civic with like a 6-gallon gas tank? And would you expect that to be a fun daily driver?
I don't
You've
think you
got a
could fit that V8
4.7-inch
into a
screen that you can't play games on. So what is the A15 going towards? You've got a ridiculously tiny, what is it? I think it's a 1/3 inch 12 megapixel shooter. What is the A15 powering? You've got the smallest battery in an iPhone. What is the A15 doing to that? So it's not the right tool for the right job for the person who would want to buy an iPhone SE as a daily communication device. They're basically feature phones when you get that small. You're not doing advanced computing. You're not doing video editing and rendering. You're not doing shorts and TikToks and reels. You're not editing audio podcasts. You're not doing all that stuff on the smallest screen there. I can't hit all of the controls in my favorite games on an iPhone SE. So if you're not doing all of that, you are burning the battery to facilitate this high performance SoC. So why would you use that? The 700 series SoC in a Pixel is better for battery life. The Pixel 5a was like a 2 to 3 day phone with my usage, and I was trying to do more advanced stuff like edit video clips and occasionally pop out an audio podcast on that thing. It didn't do it well, but it could do it. And that screen was so much nicer than what was on the $399 LCD super low resolution display on the iPhone SE. So again, it's about the right tool for the right job, not, oh, I mean, one's got more performance than the other. I guess the Antutu score is going to spend my $300 here.
Yeah, but that's not what I was talking about.
But that's just what you said. A slightly more performant, slightly less performant phone.
No, I was trying to, like, when I said what I said right there, I was trying to encapsulate your argument.
Okay.
All
but
right?
I've now expressed my argument, so we don't need to worry about trying to translate. So, because I just want to hear what you're saying, because that's what kind of got us diverted, was me interrupting the point that you were making.
Well, where I started to make the point was that there used to be only one iPhone, and it was wildly expensive compared to the wider range of phones that you could buy from other manufacturers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was always the knock on the iPhone. Well, it's too expensive. It's a $1,000 phone. So
well,
Apple,
I mean, not when there was only one iPhone. I have my original iPhone SE that was based on the iPhone 5. So from the iPhone 6, then we started bifurcating the line. And so from iPhone 6, that's when we really saw prices climbing north of $700.
Yeah. So
we didn't have $1,000 phones until iPhone. Well, I guess like iPhone 8
we were talking
with
about
$1,000
phones, though.
But
we were talking about $1,000 phones.
Sure.
And what I'm saying is the knock on Apple as we got toward the $1,000 phones was that Apple was more expensive overall, and there wasn't as much choice, right? You could buy, at first you could buy like the iPhone and then the Plus, and then
now the Plus and the Pro.
So, but Apple's answer to that was to spread the line out, right? So
was to recycle the iPhone 6.
Which is what they did with the original SE, which was a very
the 5S, right?
The 5S with the chip from the 6, but came out in the year that the 6S came out.
Sure.
So, and they got knocked for that, right? They said,
iPhone SE, like that was one of my top phone recommendations of that year at Pocket Now, because
I'm not saying that you
this familiar. No, but that's what I mean is like, when it's convenient that we say like Apple got knocked for this, did they? Did they really? Knocking a company is saying like, I am not recommending their products or services. And that has never been a part of this. It's always been, usually it's backhanded. Like, well, I mean, it's not the phone for us techies, but you probably know like your aunt doesn't need anything fancy. It's like the phone for her. And it always comes with that like little sideways recommendation. That's what counts for knocking Apple, is you shouldn't buy it, but lots of people who will probably like it. It's totally different than like the way that other companies face scrutiny, criticism, and purchasing recommendations.
That wasn't my experience.
I know. I've interrupted you again.
That wasn't my experience in hearing people criticize the phone. I heard people, denigrate that phone and other choices that Apple's made along the lines of, the same way that
I'd really struggle. And remember, this is like peak Pocket Now for me, because we were getting into headphone dongles. The iPhone SE was this great recommendation where you still had a headphone jack. It's the familiar design. I've got an iPhone 5 case on my iPhone SE, OG SE, and we were all very positive. Who was it? Oh crap, I can't remember his name. I just had a conversation with him on Mastodon. Like, I think he just retired his iPhone SE, his OG SE, during the pandemic. And that's how long lived that phone was. Because he would bring it up and say, like, hey, I need a communicator that is really small and compact, and I do stuff with like my Apple Watch and my headphones. I don't need a big screen phone. And it was only like 2 years ago that he finally retired his OG SE. So
Right.
that's still going down in history as one of my all-time favorite communicators. But I want us to talk about phones as more than just phones. There are phones that are monster trucks. There are phones that are hot rods. There are phones that are turbo diesels. There are phones that are minivans. And I want us to like point out, if you're telling me you want a budget compact sedan, the Apple version of that is not a very good buy. Now, if you're stuck with Apple, stick with Apple. That's what you're going to get. But if you're open to switching from Toyota to Honda, there's a better subcompact that you can buy.
Okay. I mean, I don't disagree with you. Like, I honestly,
I've got it right over here. I just have to get it because I really miss the iPhone 5 and the iPhone SE. So I'm still talking to you. I'm wireless, but this is still like one of my favorite phone designs of all time. And I'm going to continuously hold this up as like one of the peak eras of Apple engineering and marketing. And just this was the phone that put so much hurt on all of my favorite Android devices when I finally got a chance to play with one of these. Just beautiful. This thing is so sweet. Just look at that. Just how pretty that is. I'm going to rub my face on it.
for those of you who aren't watching the video, Juan is now rubbing a phone on his face. He did take the case off, so I skin on skin.
No, I didn't want to feel. I don't want to feel the case. Again, it's just some gnarly iPhone 5 case. I want to feel the phone. Yeah.
I understand.
Does it feel good in the hand? No, sir. Does it feel good on the face?
That's right.
That's what we got to do.
Feeling good in the hand is an entirely different thing.
But that was like my airport phone. Again, because I have a completely different relationship with this stuff than I expect the people who watch my videos to have. But that was the phone. I'd go and travel internationally. You pop the SIM card in, and I'm rolling suitcases and luggage, and I've got to make it to another connecting gate. And that's the phone. Because it genuinely was that era of Apple where your thumb reaches from here to here, and from here to here. And even on my stumpy thumbs with my little hobbit hands, the iPhone SE and the iPhone 5, by transitive property, was the only phone that I could really just run and gun with that kind of an experience. It was the communicator. And that's what an SE should be. It's a communicator device, not just a cheap device. But when we get into those price points and you tell me there are other features or other experiences or things that you care about, I can't recommend an iPhone SE the second you say battery life. That's not it.
Well, no,
an iPhone SE 2022 isn't going to do that. And now I have to either prime you to spend more on another iPhone, or you could consider switching. And that is a viable solution. I'm not trying to push diehard Apple users out of using iPhones, but I have family and friends that don't do things on their phones where the ecosystem matters to them. And I think a lot of us probably fall into that trap where like iMessage is the hook and that's about it.
See, and
if that's it, then
that's something I wanted to
why are you spending that much money to just have the right color text message?
So that was I actually put this out on X, or I can't call it X.
What a train wreck that has been. You hit me up in the DMs on X, and I was like, "Oh, Jason, I'm so glad to see your face." And it's so funny to me that like my only experiences with that platform now are just the momentum of friendships in the DMs. So
for me, like I can't invest like the psychic energy of like going to another platform.
Threads and Blue Sky.
Because honestly, like I want less social media.
Yeah.
And just social media by and large is toxic to me. And after I like if I have a heavy usage week of social media, I will invariably end up doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Because you can't get away from
I switched over to Mastodon, and the hyper nerd communities. We're talking like FOSS software developers, Linux devs. I mean, like that kind of stuff. It's been so nice. I'm talking to the like ride or die nerds over on Mastodon, and I love it. But now every other social media platform has just become work. I'm on it to have a presence because I have to have a social media presence, and I'm utilizing it not for any kind of personal activity. It's, hey, I got a new video, you should come check it out.
Yeah, I mean, the only social media platforms that I use on a regular basis, and other than YouTube, which I guess people call a social media
I know,
platform,
right?
it's not really social, for one thing. I mean, we have community pages, but it's,
No. And they've done everything they can to wreck like how nice comments used to flow, which was a social activity that is no longer a part of the platform.
yeah, but you've got to blame the commenters for that too. I mean,
You know what? So today, yes, but I really sorry. We don't have to. I don't want to spend years talking because, like, to me, YouTube wrecked all that with Google Plus. So we
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
ask for
I mean,
that. YouTube did it first, and then that just piled on all of the toxicity from there.
well, yeah, and
But
that's part and parcel
yeah,
of like a whole thing about Google
that's
that
so long
has
ago.
always been their problem. But because they still do it to this day, and they've done it forever. Like
Mm-hmm.
the way that I think of Google as a company is, like if tech companies all live on the same dorm room, like dorm floor,
Sure.
then like Microsoft are the nerds who are all like, soldering things in their rooms,
Okay.
and Apple's kind of like the cool popular kid, who doesn't drink or something. And
He's like
then
the TA that's kind of cool with you having the music playing too loud.
yeah, but as long as it doesn't like go too far.
Yeah, it doesn't mess anyone up. Sure.
But Google is like the stoner room down at the end of the hall where the pot smoke is rolling out. And everybody who's hanging out in that room is like, oh man, wouldn't it be really cool if we like tried to have a social media platform that then like interacted with all of the other things that we do, man? That would be so
Mm-hmm.
cool. And so they try it, and then they're like, not stoned. They're not stoned, and
Yeah.
they're like, this is a bad idea. But that's Google to me. But taking that aside, uh, I mean, I use Facebook for like personal stuff, and I
Okay.
have like a Painfully Honest Tech Facebook page and all that. But I've never gotten much traction there. I've never tried to get much traction there. I
It's
will
not worth it.
I will put my video links on it.
No, it's really not worth it because Facebook's business model is digital extortion.
Yeah,
So let's say you put all this effort into building up your Facebook page, then you put something out, you'll get a notification saying, this reached 10% of your followers. Would you like to pay to reach more of your followers?
right. Yeah,
And so that to me should be illegal. that's like the mafia's business model. Sure would be a shame if something happened to your nice little community. I'm just saying, it's a nice place. Maybe fork over some cash, and we'll make sure that everything's running smoothly for you.
yeah.
That to me is what we would consider an anti-consumer business practice.
So I don't really like. I go over there and I don't interact too much. It's really funny. Like I've now gone from like one season of life to another season of life on Facebook,
Yeah.
right? And so Facebook, when everybody was either getting married or having kids, was one kind of experience, right? But now
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, as you're like 50 plus, another kind of experience, one that I'm not
Yeah.
as interested in. And I'll go over there and I'll post like, you know, interesting. Like I post most of the music stuff
Yeah.
that I geek out about on Facebook, because most of my friends on Facebook are,
Yeah.
musicians or something like that. And I know that the people that follow me on Twitter don't give a shit about that. Right?
Yeah.
I
Fair.
mean, if I tweet about like Robbie Robertson died yesterday, and if I were to tweet about,
Oh, that's right. I did
yeah,
see the link on that.
so I tweeted out about, Robbie Robertson and how important the band was to me as like
Yeah.
as a
The
songwriter,
band. Hell yeah.
and I posted it both on Facebook and on Twitter. On Twitter, I think it got like, some people were liking it, or
Mm-hmm.
thumbs up, whatever they call it over there now.
Sure.
And I had one person commented, but over on Facebook, by this morning there were 25 likes and you know, 6 or 8
Multiple
comments. And
comments. Yeah.
so, I mean, that's what I'll do on Facebook. But TikTok, Instagram, I've never I've never really understood Instagram. I mean, I understand it as like I understood it as a photography repository. Like if you are
Yeah.
a visual arts person, Instagram is a place for you to go. But like taking pretty photos was not my thing. And so
Sure.
I never really got into it. And then when it became more about reels and videos and stuff, like I'm not a
You know what's funny is old guy talking to another old guy. When it
yeah.
comes to photography, I'm back over on Flickr.
Yeah.
You remember Flickr?
Oh yes, I
Now, let
do.
me tell you, it only gets like, I think the last time I tried to check out page rankings, Flickr only gets like 50 or 60 million monthly visitors. It's real little compared to the behemoth that is Instagram.
Yeah.
If you care about photography, oh man, is it nicer. Like,
Yeah.
you're not constrained to these little smartphone, easily digestible and disposable photo formats. You're not inundated with clips of videos and boomerangs and stuff like that. It is photographers. And even if
Yeah.
you're a smartphone photographer, like I'm trying to kind of empower people to be more creative and artistic with their phones, go to Flickr.
Yeah.
You'll learn so much. You'll find active, passionate communities that are just talking about photography. And you won't be bringing all of that other kind of like social media baggage. And the best thing is that it's not owned by another major tech organization. It's
Yeah.
owned by a stock photography company. So it's very unlikely that in 6 months they're going to change all their algorithms and wreck all of your feed and force you to do different things to jump through hoops. What they care about is that you get into photography and you've got the best quality to share your photos.
Right. Yeah.
And
I mean,
and it's real nice.
I think Instagram had a moment where the formatting and sort of the venue was part
It
of
was
the
amazing.
expression, right? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
like so,
Like Vine. Absolutely. Yeah.
but once they started doing reels and trying to
And
chase tick,
stories, and they were chasing
I,
Snapchat, and then they were
I
chasing TikTok.
maybe
They lost what made it special.
maybe this is an old man thing, but I've never understood stories. Like,
Yeah.
what are you supposed to? It's like, okay, a post that disappears. Why?
Yeah.
Why do I want to do that?
FOMO. It is a
Yeah,
psychological hook where if you're looking for internet points and you want people to engage with your content, if you are regularly posting things that evaporate that they can't check up on, you will drive that in our primate brains to engage consistently and regularly. And it is a classic hook for jerry rigging higher time on site metrics, which is
interesting.
why YouTube's algorithmic shift towards these shorts types of material, it's utterly disposable content. It's not about, I mean, people are doing amazing and creative things. I am not talking about the users. I am talking about the platform and
Right.
the executive leadership of that platform. Even the YouTube engineers on the ground floor, I think they're doing some incredible work in maintaining a platform. But the executive decision is we want divisive content and we want disposable content that keeps the dopamine trigger going as you're going through little disposable clips. You will stay on site longer than if someone makes a crafted, articulate, well researched, well produced, longer form video. And
Right.
that's to all of our detriment. It's not good for the user, and it's not really good for the platform in the long term, and it's not good for the creator.
The only thing I would say about that is like YouTube, I think, is maybe uniquely positioned as the one platform that has to this point withstood different sort of
Yeah.
fads or moments
Well,
that
they just sort of absorbed them.
yeah,
Again, like Vine was 6-second video clips. Well, there's nothing unique to Vine that you can't replicate on
yeah.
YouTube. And in
And
fact, Viners would often like collect their Vines, publish them on YouTube, and that's where they were picking up their early like product and brand sponsorship deals, was watching people watch their Vines on YouTube.
yeah,
So
well, I
YouTube
mean,
has always been the amoeba that can like suck up every other fad.
And TikTok is the same way. Like you'll see so many compilation videos of different kinds of
Sure.
TikToks, and it's not always at this point, it's not the TikTokers themselves who are
No.
doing the collecting. Like other
Yeah.
people are grabbing their stuff and using it.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I watch YouTube now, like if I'm just casually watching YouTube, I watch like fail videos. And I have a grandson, so we watch like puppy and kitty
Sure.
videos.
Yeah.
We have our puppy kitty video time where we just like sit down before dinner and watch a 15-minute.
It's fun. Yeah.
But I'll watch Mojo, and
you love listicles.
well,
love
but
it.
The thing is, like,
they're fun.
I find Watch Mojo, and this is something that I've been thinking about. Watch Mojo, What Culture, whatever, like those kinds of listicle channels. I find them really engaging because it has a built-in conversation, right?
Yeah.
Here's our top 10 ways that
this thing,
yeah, top 10 unexpected things that ended horror movies, that nobody saw coming, or whatever it is. And you watch it because you're like, okay, what are mine? And how do I jive with what you say it is, right?
Sure.
And so it's intellectually stimulating in a very casual way.
I maybe unfairly mock listicles, but when it comes to something like Watch Mojo, there was at least some editorial effort to crafting a conversation. I feel like the dark side of that is, with the popularity of listicles, the slippery slope has been food and crafty DIY styles of videos. And those are really ugly areas of YouTube. I can't remember her name, and someone will probably correct me in the comments, but she's a chef, and she makes these debunking videos looking at, like, well, it's one of these wacky, like, DIY or food things, and God, I can't remember her name. I can see her face, and she's in my subscription feed. But when we dig into that, we see YouTube profits significantly by videos that misrepresent things like recipes, could potentially lead to harm. Some of them are outright dangerous when there are fads that people don't understand, and they're largely built on content farms.
Right.
So one channel gets to their gold play button, and then they can be the launching point for numerous other channels that just rip off the same content, but they're all part of the same network.
Right.
And then those channels get their gold play buttons, and YouTube makes a ton of money on them, but they're doing things that are harmful. They're if someone were to copy or replicate what was in that video, they could be dangerous. And so that to me is always, like, in the back of my brain, listicles begat one thing that was awesome. A way to condense a really cool and engaging conversation, but then morphed into people exploiting that trick in our brain for lists of content into ways that could really hurt lots of people.
Yeah, and
is these content farms, if you see them, like, look up what you see this, like, bunker.
Yeah.
And it's people in these little cubicles shooting content all day for these channels and for these networks.
Right.
And it starts to look a lot like this really dystopian slave labor. And not slave, but like indentured servitude kind of labor.
The thing that always shocks me, and I think that
that's not Watch Mojo. Watch Mojo's legit. I like them too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think ultimately, when you talk about channels like low effort channels that just kind of, so there's low effort channels that just kind of compile things and throw them together, and then there's like channels like Watch Mojo or Simon Whistler and his like 9,000 channels about history or whatever it is. But those are high effort channels, and I look at those and I say, okay, this is really interesting. The thing that I think will always exist on YouTube, no matter how much YouTube wants to make it stop, is, so I mean, in 2017, 2016, 2018, we had the Paul brothers, which came to us from Vine. And so they were a black guy on YouTube. And then, we had Shane Dawson has been a black guy on YouTube for multiple different periods of time.
Yeah.
But yet still seems to be able to come back around. And then we have, James Charles and those kinds of cult of personality, weird, narcissistic, just like they are
Sure.
subhuman, but somehow they engender people to
Kind
like
of the
follow
worst
them.
of what our communities, but
Yeah.
in that they are tittillating and exciting, and they are also really good at playing the heel. So
In
even
the
when we're
most
really taking
yeah
it to them, it just further emboldens
yeah
their production.
and the thing is, like, they do it at the lowest common denominator, which is always frustrating to me, because
Mm-hmm.
like doing things at the lowest common denominator and having that kind of success only begets more people who are going to do that. But
Yeah.
when you said like food channels that were potentially dangerous because people are trying all this crazy stuff, like I never saw, until I saw a video about it, I never saw a mukbang channel.
Oh God. Yeah.
But
Boy, that is a different cultural expression than I am prepared to engage with in any serious fashion.
when I saw a
Sorry, just real quick. Anne Reardon.
okay,
Anne Reardon is the YouTuber that I was trying to remember, and she's
yeah,
amazing. And she actually has done videos blowing open investigative journalism
yeah,
on things like content farms, YouTube's verification and monetization policies, like beyond just can I make cupcakes in the microwave. She's done more legit heavy lifting than
right.
most news agencies have in the world of social media. I'll
Well, and
shut up. I'm sorry.
the same thing with like somebody like CoffeeZilla, who I think is, doing
Yes,
really,
very interesting work on a platform that like I would not have expected to see that conversation hosted.
yeah. And
Absolutely.
like, I don't watch him regularly. I don't think I'm subscribed to him, but when he pierces the zeitgeist, like he did with the Luke, the whichever Paul brother it was, uh,
Yeah, but all of like the
Logan
crypto
Paul.
and the
Yeah,
NFT
yeah,
markets and stuff like that. Also with who did Line Goes Up? Because they're cut from similar cloth, and it just could be folding ideas.
yeah,
Oh, I had to look that up. That's embarrassing.
yeah. I think there's always going to be stuff like that on YouTube that is just like lowest common denominator
Yeah.
trash, and it's frustrating to know, because so I went through that period of time where I could have gone the like be the heel, over the top, drama channel thing, right?
For sure.
Like
Yeah.
I was having success with that kind of content, and I could have taken it further. Like I think about other people, like you know they're mostly people who are in the like talking about entertainment products,
Sure.
um and like they eventually all go insane,
Yeah.
like just all of them go insane.
Oh, because you can't stay at that level. Your
Yeah,
audience expects you to continue
to escalate.
evolving, and the
And
only way to do that is to escalate.
yeah, and for me, I was just like, no, no, I just couldn't do it. So I had to find a way. Like, I do think that people appreciated my videos as like kind of a challenging kind of, a little bit playing the heel, but
Hmm.
trying to incite people in some way. And
Sure.
I've been in the woods, like, trying to figure that out for the longest time. Like, how do I continue to do that, but make it in such a way that it at least stays intellectually interesting for me, and not
Yeah.
necessarily, and interesting for other people. And I really don't know what that is, because I feel like, I've been on YouTube at least somewhat seriously for 10 years, right?
Hmm.
And doing it now as my job for 4.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that it is very, very difficult to scale the kind of content that we do. Like,
Yeah.
it's like you do a tech review, you dive deeper into it, you you talk about the thing that you are best or most engaged in about,
Qualified. Yeah.
and then, like, but there's no way to scale up from that, right?
No.
I mean, you were able to do it, at least in the sense that it led to working for other people and creating content for them and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen other people who do that, but I think for the most part, most people who are on YouTube are kind of like lone wolf type,
It's
not
been one of
square
the
peg
first.
round hole people.
Yeah,
you
it's been
know?
one of the frustrations because, and I feel you on this because, I mean, for whatever individual phone or laptop disagreements we might have,
Right.
one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed your commentary is the consistency of your opinion. Even when I disagree, I know you're not misrepresenting your opinion just
Right.
to fit whatever's going to be most popular to the YouTube algorithm.
Right.
Because we see some of those people who will contort themselves through hoops to complain about one thing on a less popular product, but then kind of just give that a pass on a more popular product.
Right.
But then also, you were one of the one of the early participants, and then one of the most consistent participants on some of my experiments, like the subreddit.
Right.
It was always a joy to see one of your videos start getting upvoted on my little glowing rectangles
Yeah.
subreddit. And to that point, for as much as we like to talk about this community, oh, it's so collaborative and look at all these people, and these are some of my closest friends when we're just like off camera and we're chatting about stuff. But the second you get into production, there is really not a lot of room for consistent collaboration.
Right.
If it's a one-off video, that's kind of cool. But something like that subreddit, I went for 2 years just trying to encourage people to share and upvote on their own.
Yeah.
And that was an abysmal failure. And
Right.
the only thing that started getting that, and with the exception of you actually jumping on early to give it a try just to see what it was.
Right. Well, I mean,
But the only
I'd
thing,
always been looking for a way to crack Reddit,
yes,
because
that I spent 9 years of my life working on that subreddit. But what really started to get it momentum was when, at about year 3, I scrubbed everything. I got rid of the handful of moderators that I had sort of started using, and they weren't really doing anything for the site, and I automated it.
right.
So I built plugins and APIs that would point to my favorite YouTubers and auto post their videos. And then that started getting a little bit of traffic from the actual Reddit algorithm. And a few of
Right.
those, they never made it to the front page, but they made it way higher up. And I could see when someone would find one of my videos on glowing rectangles and then share it to another larger subreddit.
Right.
And that's the mission. The mission was
Right.
never to be a front page subreddit, it was to be a feeder.
Right.
And it didn't matter how many people I tried to bring on, because if they had participated on their own, we would have had that launch years earlier.
Right.
And the same thing, like I've talked to people about like Mastodon.
Yeah.
Mastodon right now, I told you it has that peak like Linux, Dev, FOSS, hardcore Android. There's a rich iPhone community, but there's not really much of a consumer Android community. So Jason, right now, with the kind of content that you put out on iPhones, there's an audience built in that is surging because people are leaving Twitter, and Threads
Right.
really isn't
Yeah.
keeping their consistent user count, that are hungry for that kind of content. If you're an Android fan like I am, I could build it from scratch.
Right.
There's so little activity. But when I reach out to other content creators and say like, hey, you post something, I post something, and we'll both share it,
Right.
it works once.
Right.
Literally once. And then they see,
Yeah.
well, I didn't get 100,000 views on this video. I guess I'll just go back to Twitter. And we're
Well-
like, that's not how this works. That's not how helping each other works. You're gonna fail if you're constantly beating your head against other platforms' algorithms. The only
Right.
thing that's gonna work is if you own your own audience.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest the hardest relationship to maintain.
And that's why, like I said before, I'm moving more toward so I've been an artist, musician, writer, et cetera, et cetera. And YouTube
Yeah.
kind of filled a lot of those gaps for me, and was a lot of those different things all together. But it also gave me the opportunity to find an audience that would have been a lot more difficult to find as a musician. It's
Yeah.
almost impossible to find as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, blogs had their time, and they're still useful, but they're really just like lead generators, right? They're lead generators and click farms. You put your so YouTube gave me an opportunity to like reach a wider audience. But I still, as much as I enjoy technology, what really brought me to technology is still like the artistic expression and how I use the technology in order to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I've been feeling for these last couple of years like I want to have a not necessarily a different conversation, and I also want to feel like I'm helping more. I want to
Yeah.
feel like I'm able to build off that. And so I've thought a lot about coaching or consulting and teaching, those kinds of
Hmm.
things. And at this point, like the community that I've been able to build on YouTube, I think what I have to teach of the people who would find me through that is how to do YouTube, right?
Right.
Like, but
But
the thing about me teaching how to do YouTube isn't the same as I think a lot of other YouTube educators would teach it. Because
right.
what I know is how to teach people to be better artists, or if you want to use the parlance of YouTube, creators, right?
Sure.
How, and to make it a lifestyle as opposed to, a checklist of like what you can do to make the video that's going to trigger the algorithm,
Right.
right? Because I still feel like the way to the way to have longevity on any platform like this is
Hmm.
consistency, right?
Yeah.
Because there'll be ebbs and flows of, more traffic, less traffic, times when things are going well, times when things aren't. But if you are consistent, then you build a career, right?
Sure.
And with that, like I've always thought in the tech space, it was like if you start making tech videos, first people show up because you're one of the people making videos about that thing that they want to know about, right?
Yeah.
And then they show up because they've subscribed to your channel because they like the way you talk about the things, right? And then later they show up because they don't care what you're talking about. They like you, right?
Right.
Like that's the that's the
So
trajectory.
the only concern I have in something like that is because your depiction of that is it sounds very much like the YouTube I started with,
Yeah,
where I have been making content online, video content online in earnest since 2007.
right,
What we see today, and this is kind of vibing with the impact of medium-sized channels, like channels
right,
between your subscriber count and my subscriber count, is as YouTube changes the rules, YouTube as a platform can weather any fad.
right,
But if you built your audience and they got to a point where it didn't matter what you talked about, they would still watch one of your videos, YouTube operates as a gatekeeper between you and your audience.
right.
And this is one of the ways that YouTube is becoming increasingly more like Facebook. There's not a pay this price and we'll send your video out to your
Although
subscribers,
they are encouraging creators to buy ads.
but that's also a part of this change. They
Right,
didn't go directly to Facebook's business model, but they're adopting some of those strategies.
right,
And so, to be successful on YouTube, again, I'm not offering advice. If you want to learn how to make a successful YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/Juan Bagnell and do the opposite of what I'm doing on that channel, and you will be successful
right,
on YouTube. But you also have to know, as YouTube changes the rules and pulls the rug out from under you, you just have to keep appeasing whatever change YouTube makes.
right.
And that I think has been one of the, like we talked about earlier, and we were also off camera, is this like existential crisis. I have hundreds of subscriptions in my YouTube feed.
Right.
It is shockingly sad how many of those channels are defunct.
Yeah.
And I stay subscribed to them because it's like from a bygone era, every now and then I like to chew through an old Erica Griffin video.
Yeah.
I like to chew through some old tech commentary and think about all of the content creators, especially those who've been around for a little while, who are actively talking about taking a break, knowing that the YouTube algorithm is going to savage their channel if they stop producing regularly, if they just take a vacation, and then
But
never
YouTube
really
swears
get
that
back
won't
into.
happen.
But it absolutely does.
Yeah.
But again, it's this is why I've pointed to things like Reddit. Now, unfortunately, Reddit has also gone down part of this pathway of impoopification, to PGify, a term by Cory Doctorow. But that same mechanism is
Right.
at play.
Yeah.
So when I talk about diversifying, one of the reasons why I point to something like Mastodon is Mastodon isn't a singular platform.
Right.
So if Jason wants to host some really interesting iPhone conversations on Mastodon, if Jason's Mastodon server changes the rules on how content is posted, then Jason's server is removed from the larger federation of Mastodon services. They
Right.
can change the rules, but then
Yeah.
they won't be linked to other Mastodon instances.
Right.
And if you don't want an algorithm standing on your neck, preventing you from getting to the people who followed you, who said they wanted to see your content, you have to find places free of that algorithmic manipulation. And to
Right.
date, I have almost no followers on Flickr. I adore the actual interactions I have with people on Flickr. Those are real
Right.
conversations about photography. I have 600 followers on Mastodon. I get better engagement with 600 followers on Mastodon than I do with 1,600 followers on Threads and 8,000 followers on Instagram and 17,000 followers on Twitter. And I've been
Right.
doing this for a while where I'll round robin. I'll post the same thing to all three sites. And guess which one I have real interactions with real people? It's on the one that isn't algorithmically standing on my neck.
Right.
And so if you can show the YouTube algorithm that you're bringing eyeballs from off of YouTube to check out that content, YouTube will probably think you're more valuable.
Yeah.
But right now, if you just try to work within the confines of YouTube, every time YouTube changes the rules, your content is screwed.
Yeah.
It's done.
Well,
It's game over.
and that's, I mean, part of the reason that I want to build something that, kind of like you said earlier, is YouTube is sort of like is not top of the funnel, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
if I can build something where outside of the YouTube landscape, I'm able to do education stuff. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the low hanging fruit, the things that everybody
Sure.
always say is coaching, consulting, build a course, blah blah blah, whatever. Those are all things that I have done for
Mm-hmm.
many years, and I've built courses for myself to teach for almost 20 years. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, those are things that I can do, and then YouTube becomes like a lead generator almost.
See,
Like
I've relegated YouTube in my brain is basically just free server hosting at this point.
see
Like
the
that's
and
all I think of it.
and
It's such poor discoverability compared to what it used to be.
but
I'm
I
not
think the
expecting
pendulum
people to find it.
I think ultimately the pendulum is always going to be swinging,
I hope so.
But
As we go through these different fads and we reach a saturation point. So like a couple years back during the pandemic, I felt we all got kind of a bump. The YouTube algorithm was really pushing longer
I
form content again for channels like mine.
so
That was
here's what
kind of exciting. And then out of that, well, now it's all the lifestyle and the short little clips and the shorts and all this stuff. And now channels like mine are kind of getting hammered again.
well, I mean, there what I found was channels that were doing content like how-to content or reviewing the most recent products or those kinds of things. Like I saw Podcastage, his channel exploded during the
Yeah,
pandemic, and there were other people who were reviewing Apple stuff or whatever it was.
sure.
I was still at that time like kind of doing my commentary thing,
Yeah.
and like it became doubly difficult to do because um, it felt really stupid to argue about 120 hertz refresh rate when
Yeah. In the middle of a global pandemic.
hundreds
Yeah.
of thousands of people are dying. I'm just like, so it felt disingenuous to have that be what I do, and also like I think that's when I started to get to the place where I wasn't feeling able to
Yeah.
continue to do that. Like I knew that. So the weird thing that happened was 2019, so 2017 into 2018 through 2019. That's sort of like the arc where my channel like went up and then it went up and then it just sort of leveled off for a while and then it started to taper off. But literally
Mm-hmm.
like January 1 of 2020, my traffic dropped in half.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't recover.
Yeah.
And then I was doing Amazon live streams, and those were paying the bills because
Mm-hmm.
I had a commission deal with them for, like a contract with them,
For
and
sure.
that was more money than I could hope to make through AdSense on YouTube, or
Yeah,
and it was
not even close.
and it was also a lot easier money than doing like sponsorships at the time.
Yeah.
Because I mean, to make that much money, I'd have to do
I'm
several
I'm working I'm
sponsorships.
working on a couple right now, and I'm still in production heck, trying to
Um,
finish off these sponsored videos.
well, and I'm doing them now because Amazon changed their deal,
Yeah.
and it's they made it so it was impossible to actually reach the gold tiers for the
Yeah.
commissions. But so now I think I didn't focus on YouTube as much because that was part of my focus. I feel like I'm more engaged in YouTube now again, and I like that. I feel like I'm on better terms with it. But from 2020 to 2021, and then 21 to 22, my views have gone by half, by half, by half.
Yeah.
And so now, like, and that's what we were talking about, is like, do I host this podcast on my regular channel? Do I put it on a podcast channel? Do I start a clips channel? What do
Yeah.
I do? Because when I put this on the regular channel, it would get like 800, 900 views, and it was just the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of doing it, right? So you can't like look at those views and say that's as good as it's going to get when you've only done it like three
But
times.
unfortunately, because when I was hosting my podcast on my own personal channel, I'd get like 2,000, 3,500 views.
Yeah,
But then you'd go into all of your analytics, and you've got to be a marketing analyst expert,
yeah,
and you'd see like, oh, with every podcast I put out, I'm generating thousands of views,
right,
but my watch time is a certain percentage isn't very good.
right,
So even though they might watch one of my 2-hour podcasts for like 20 minutes, oh, but that's only like a fifth of the total video
yeah,
runtime. And I was watching kind of the same thing. Like views across my whole channel were starting to drop, and
right,
recommendations were starting to drop. And then what clued me in was the percentage graph of how much of my audience was coming from like recommendations was
right,
starting to diminish.
right.
And to me, that speaks to, again, we can't ever decipher this stuff because YouTube doesn't actually help you make your content better. You just have to guess
Yeah,
what's going on with the YouTube algorithm. And that's where I've been coming up with my pattern of behavior hypothesis, is when we see these kinds of changes happen, then it's a popularity aspect, and there's also a YouTube algorithm. For my side of this, during the pandemic, I saw my numbers rise in part because I really think families were buying computers and
yeah,
phones and tablets just to survive
right.
for the first time in years.
Yeah.
And so we found this influx of consumers looking for topics on those types of purchasing, and my views have leveled off, but I still have. I mean, like, my channel is kind of garbage for someone who's been around at this as long as I have, but I'm still pulling around 1,000 new subscribers every month. But I'm definitely not seeing that reflected in people coming back to revisit videos, or when I publish a new video, there is no benefit to that subscriber count influencing what's going to be a popular video and what won't. So I can't play that game. I have to make the videos I want to make. And then if I can bring people to watch them from other places, then I feel like that's
Yeah.
the best I can do, because YouTube won't help me.
So
YouTube is actively getting in my way.
yeah, the interesting thing for me is that I hit 200,000 subscribers in October of 2021,
Mm-hmm.
and I have been at 202,000 subscribers
Mm-hmm.
since, I want to say, June of
And
2022.
And I also want to express, for your audience and for anyone who knows me, we have to be very careful how much of this we actually tell you. If
Yeah,
we give up graphs and talk about our metrics, that could actually give our channel a community strike.
yeah,
That is against the terms of service of being a YouTube content creator. So even though this would be data I would like to share with my audience to help inform why I make the videos I make, and why I do the brand sponsorship deals that I do, and why I try to make the content that I do, I am not really allowed to give you too much insight
Right.
on what's going on with my channel. And that to me is also another little warning light in the back of my brain that this is not the healthiest relationship to bank all of my future
Well,
potential
yeah.
career and earnings on.
Well,
And I don't know that YouTube has my interests in mind if
and
I'm not allowed to tell you what's going on with my channel.
I mean, if you're not in the sort of like special tier of YouTube AdSense, and if you're not like, I think that relying on YouTube for anything other than access for eyeballs, like, and again, not being top of the funnel, but being like one of the things that draws people to
Sure.
a larger thing. Like you have to run. Some people say you have to run your YouTube channel as a business. And I think you have to run a business that has a YouTube channel,
That's what I
and
agree with.
you have to do it in such a way that there is scalability. Like
Hmm.
there's not scalability unless you have some outside product, service, whatever it is, that doesn't involve YouTube,
Yeah,
right? And I know YouTube it has been bringing in features to try and help creators have more ways to make money,
sure.
but those ways don't move the needle, right?
And also, I feel like there's a philosophical argument at play where I have difficulty. This isn't for other content creators. This is more for the audience. And plenty of our friends are going to viscerally disagree with me. And I'm still their friends, and I'm hoping that they'll still be my friend. But when it comes to things like my relationship with the audience, I am very concerned about the path YouTube is taking. When they just beat their quarterly financial expectations, they've made more money than in the history of YouTube than they ever have before, and
Right.
they made more money than they were expecting at the same time as they're jacking up rates on YouTube Premium
Hmm.
and they're serving more ads than the platform has ever seen before. Now, there's a whole debate. We don't have time for it in this podcast, but I'd love to come back on and have this chat with you because
I've got to go
I'd
get
be
the
interested to hear your
grandson, and
thoughts.
yeah.
But when it comes to something like ad blockers, every YouTuber has a different opinion or a different perspective on this topic. And for me, I am very concerned about the ads my audience are being served because I have no control over it.
Right.
I have no input. And we're about to lead into another very divisive political season where YouTube has already backed off policing their own problems with misinformation
Yeah.
and policing their own issues with, sort of the strategic manufacturing of bad content.
Yep.
And so when I can't tell YouTube, these are the products and companies and services that I would like to serve on my channel, then I can't in good conscience say you have to watch ads if you're not going to pay for premium. And I also can't in good conscience say you have to pay for premium if YouTube is going to continue to boost prices
Yeah.
on YouTube Premium. And this
Yeah.
is really sensitive stuff. Most YouTube content creators, I think, would probably disagree with some of my sentiment, but I can only look at what I feel is the best mental health outcome for people who might watch my channel. And like I said, I already look at YouTube as being free server storage. I'm not making my living on YouTube, even though I can't show you what that really looks like.
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to me. Like I'm definitely not making my living, via AdSense. AdSense has
No.
dropped precipitously over the last few years, and I don't think it's only because the views have dropped. I think that the frequency of ads, the CPM of ads, I think all of that stuff has changed. And it started in 2017 with
Mm-hmm.
the Logan Paul
Yeah.
Japanese
We got a little taste of it with something that PewDiePie had done, and
yeah,
YouTube started changing up some of their community behavior. But then it really took off
yeah,
after Paul was out in that Japanese forest.
unaliving forest.
Yes.
Which is again one of those things where you would think a living, breathing, thinking adult human being would be like, this is a bad idea.
All right. I was just curious because I never dig into my channel analytics and I can't show you. I would screen share this if I were allowed to. So what am I at? Like 160,000 subscribers. I'm not a huge channel by any stretch. My views from the lifetime of my channel are a consistent upline.
Yeah.
My views have not tapered off, and I weathered the pandemic pretty well.
Right.
My monetization is a decrescendo
Yeah.
across that exact same access.
Yeah.
When I had 20,000 subscribers, I was paying rent.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what those numbers are, but YouTube was paying rent. And
Yeah.
now, with many, many more monthly visitors, viewers, a higher watch time, and more subscribers than ever, nope. Not in the same situation.
And it's interesting because my channel had like it looks like this, like nothing. And then
huge.
And then and like, but I mean, I remember, so I had that I'm not pre-ordering the iPhone video that like got like, that video would never get 1 million views in today's YouTube.
No.
Never. It was me sitting in front of the camera bitching about Apple, right?
Right.
And maybe it was a 12-minute video of me just sitting there bitching, and it got 1.3 million whatever views it got, and I made a decent amount of money that month.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, like if I could repeat that on a regular basis, then I wouldn't have to be doing any sponsored ad reads or anything. But but I mean, even I would say that what I make per month from AdSense right now that I can bank on, and part of this is me not focusing on YouTube as much and not being as regular with content and stuff like that.
Sure.
So, whenever you get to the point where you're not being as consistent with your content, and then your ad revenue drops down, and then it takes you a full like month or two to get back up to that previous level, right?
Yeah.
So, but even so, if I just say like where my median was, is easily 50, if not 75% less than what my median was not when I was like doing gangbusters, but where I was like regularly up through 2019.
I never shut my channel down, but I scaled way back for the 2+ years that I was at Pocket Now.
Right.
And so there is a bit of a dip, but it never cratered. I made sure to at least get some kind of editorializing up on that channel. My earnings are so the percentage I've lost is significantly higher than what you've described.
Yeah.
How much cash I've been making is a lot less from years past.
And I'm sure there are many, many factors that play into this. I wonder,
but until YouTube can actually empower creators to have those conversations and turn it into a business, then your point is spot on. And for anyone who's listening to this into our third hour,
I know.
Every time we do this, we're like, hey, let's just hang out for an hour, and then we talk for like a whole day.
Daycare
we do need to hang out more frequently, so that we don't do
closes at 5:30. So I have to get off.
I've got to publish a video in about 45 minutes. I can't stay on for another 40 minutes. But to your point, if you are into this for the creation and the expression and you want to tell stories, your point, I think, was beautifully summed up. And I think that might be the point to like wrap this conversation up. If you are a small business owner, your business is you, and your business is not a platform.
Right.
And then how you interact with the platforms can help inform the direction of your business, but your business starts with you first and foremost. It ends with you last most, but in the middle is where you can be influenced for some of these chicanery expressions, social media, and algorithms. But you nailed it.
Yeah.
If you're a content creator, your business is you. Yeah. And whatever you do with YouTube is YouTube, but it's not the last, it's just a part. It's one step of the journey. It's not the destination.
Well, and I mean, I have the benefit of having had a long career in trying to make a living as a musician, and then a long career as a teacher and focused mainly on writing. And I became very familiar with the business side of a lot of different entertainment entities, right? Yeah. And YouTube is really no different, except for the fact that there are no gatekeepers, sort of keeping you from eyeballs. Now,
So
YouTube
I
itself
think
can,
that's what's
yeah,
changing. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Because I would have agreed with you, especially back in like the old Wild West days of Blip and Revision 3 and Mevio and all of these other when Google TV
yeah,
was a video streaming service as a competitor to YouTube. I absolutely would have agreed with you. I come out of a Hollywood background, working at talent agencies and casting facilities and doing voiceover work. Um, that's what kind of drew me to this also. If you have a story to tell, you can find an audience, they're going to send it to that audience, everyone's going to be happy.
right,
But that I think has been part of the change is if you let the audience pick for themselves, they don't spend as much time on your site.
yeah,
And Facebook learned that if you keep people angry and afraid, they'll stay on Facebook longer. And
yeah,
now
and
YouTube, I feel, is kind of following in a similar manipulation of the feed of information that people consume.
here's the one thing that I think that we have in our advantage. So I think another thing that the pandemic did was brought a lot more people to platforms like YouTube,
Yeah.
you know, where it's like, hey, I like those things. I like doing those things. I've always wanted to try this out. I've got a lot more time at home right now. And I think that as people become more and more frustrated, the inventory of people who are making videos might not continue to rise.
Yeah.
Like the one superpower that any creator can have, whether it's on YouTube or whatever artistic venture that you have, your one superpower is not quitting. Like
Yeah.
if you don't quit, you end up
They don't
winning
win.
somehow.
No,
you know,
no.
you
Even as like I will be one of those perpetual Salieris. Like I can see the genius in others, and I can't always realize it for myself. But for me, it is that like if I don't quit, YouTube doesn't win. So I'm going to keep going because I have a story to tell and there's something I want to express, even though I feel like I'm facing this like fog of pressure sort of preventing me from reaching what I want to reach.
Well, when I turned 30, my daughter was born, in my early 30s, and I'd been through the music thing, and things didn't quite pan out the way that I had hoped, and I was pretty burned out. And I didn't really have a plan for what was after that because that was
Yeah.
always my plan was. So when I went through all of that, and then I ultimately came back around to creating stuff as a way to get through it, then I realized that that's what I do.
Yeah.
That is my, whether I get paid for it or not, that is my focus, that is my job, right? And so the rest of my life has to be finding a way to continue to facilitate me doing that while being able to take care of my family and pay my bills
Yeah.
and not be like a total
Same.
like suck on humanity.
Right.
Right.
Just a
And so
leech.
but here I am, like, so if that was when I was 30, I'm 51 years old now. And only 4 years ago was I finally in a place where I could step away from a 9 to 5 job
Hmm.
and do this stuff and pay my half of the bills. So
It's heady.
if you don't quit, then you're probably doing it for reasons other than fame and fortune. And if you're
Yeah.
doing it for reasons other than fame and fortune, then you're probably doing it for good reasons.
Agreed.
I, One of my teachers in grad school, uh, and he was kind of like that teacher who would tell you the way it was. And
Yeah.
he said to a group of people who all like were, out of 1,500 people, 25 get picked to be the class that year for that grad program. So it's like statistically very hard to get into. And he told this group of people, like day one, he said, if you can do anything else besides be a writer and be happy with your life,
You say same thing about acting. Yeah.
then go do that.
Go do it. Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
can't, if you have that particular insanity that says this is what I have to do for whatever reason,
Yeah.
then buckle up
And
and be ready to take it.
it's expressing that to I think a population of people coming up. as the old guys. Like
Yeah.
we are bookending an era of youth that grew up before
Yeah.
everything was digitized and digital and electronic, and we are the translators between
Yeah.
people older than us and people younger than us. We're like one of the smallest pockets
Right.
of generation, but we witnessed and came of age at a time of really interesting change. But as we are seeing another generation of kids coming up, we're like, the number one job kids want to have when they grow up is be an influencer.
Yeah.
It's why I'm so persistent on this conversation about proper consumer education, about disclosing what we can about the platforms and services that we interact with.
Right.
And it's about setting down the reality of like money and business and taking care of yourself and having health insurance, and like the realities of working from that day to day are the least sexy aspects of any creative endeavor. But if your creativity is amazing, but you can't survive as a human being because you lack the skills, then you're gonna fail. Doesn't matter how creative or how consistent you are with your
Yeah.
content. You also got to pay your taxes. You also got to see the doctor for a checkup. You got to
Yeah.
like hit the dentist every 6 months. It's like all of that combined. And so like my daughter's 7, and she thinks what daddy does is amazing, and she sees me on the TV, and sometimes it's actually on the TV and not just a video streaming on the TV.
Right.
And so she has this idea of what it's like, and every single time I bring her into the office, it's like, no, here's how we edit a video, and here's how we record this, and this is what I have to do. This battery is dangerous. Let's check this out, and how do we bring that in?
Right.
And it's like, if anything I can do is sort of appeal to that engineering side, to say like, there are industries and there are professions and there are ways that we make money. You see the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Everything else is required to actually bring this to the table. And so it's like exactly what you're talking about is the best, is like the strongest confirmation and thumbs up and agree that I can give to what you're talking about. But also it's the headiness of what you're describing is a lifestyle that is horrifically unfamiliar. If you want to be a dentist, there's kind of an understood path.
Yeah.
If you want to be a lawyer, there's kind of an understood path. And when people get this idea and like, hey, during the pandemic, I have this old camera, I want to try being a photographer. I'm kind of laid off from going into the office and I can try these things. And the business of being a photographer is really difficult.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's
so
true.
they won't know until they know, until they try. And that's always the thing I fear. And I'm not picking on any of the mutual acquaintances that we have in terms of YouTube gurus and stuff like that.
Right.
But one of the reasons I got out of voiceover was the cottage industry of selling voiceover as a lifestyle to people that were probably never going to have any kind of income or steady work in voiceover.
Right.
And I feel like YouTube is also one of those things that it's very dangerous to get kind of hooked into the image of the lifestyle.
Right.
What you said is absolutely correct. If you got a story to tell, go tell that story. You're the only one who can tell it. But if there's anything else you can do to make money, go do anything else.
Yeah. And to me, it's about it's a quality of life thing. Like I have found out for over many, many years that
I would be way wealthier if I were still working with Department of Energy contractors. Let's just put that out there that way. I would have government clearance again. I would have my P card, my yellow card. I'd have purchasing discretion over millions of dollars of lab equipment. I'd still be playing with really cool and fun tech, but that wasn't the story I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah. And, you know, I've just always not fit in like a natural everyday kind of work environment. I've tried. You know, some other time I really have to jump off now. I got 15 minutes to get my grandson.
Yeah, I know.
But
I tried to give us the summation, and then both of us like, oh, but that's also interesting too.
Yeah, I know. But no, I got fired from 3 different jobs in the times that I lived in New York, and they were all jobs that were like that next step job that you're supposed to take. And I just failed miserably at doing it. And most of it was because I didn't have the buy-in. I just could not allow myself to do it. And so time after time I got fired. And like it was after my wedding, after my daughter was born, like all of these like really, really, you know, like I'm
big
trying to be the
events.
responsible guy and do the thing that, you know, build the career, like, you know, whatever. And yeah. But anyway, I do have to go. run and
Yes.
get my grandson before they shut the door and leave
This
him
is the
outside.
best hour-long podcast I've been on in months. We
Yeah.
said this the last time we hung out in a live stream is let's not let this much time go in between us talking so that we won't go 3 hours on a podcast.
But I think we'd go 3 hours like every single time.
We would.
Yeah.
I know we would, but again, I missed your face, man.
Me too.
I've always appreciated and I've always cherished our conversations, and this is obviously no different because I feel, again, we have some of these experiences that we can share, and we're cut from similar cloth, and the fine points that we might debate over, I don't feel obfuscate that you are someone who is so passionate about this part of the story, and it's a part of the story that I don't feel is told with the regularity that it deserves. So thank you for having me on, and I'm always happy and excited to help promote and help support the kind of production that keeps people interested in these conversations.
Thanks, man. I do appreciate it. So, folks, if you've made it this far,
I apologize.
You really should have stopped about 2 hours ago. But if you're still here, thanks so much for being here. Painfully Honest Tech Podcast. As always, the podcast so honest and long it hurts.
Yeah, I got to stretch.
Until the next time, we're out.